Are you good with this? Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me okay back there? Maybe. Well, and I'm not quiet myself. Can you guys hear me in the back if I use this mic? Okay. Well, my name's Danae Claiborne. I'm the clerk for the commission. I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming here tonight. I realized that it was mentioned that it was the week of daylight savings time, so I recognize that we're all running on a slightly different clock, so I really appreciate you coming out tonight. I know the commission appreciates it too. Unfortunately, they had some family obligations and some illness come up at the last minute, so I was hoping that maybe one or two could sneak out of other obligations to be here this evening, but unfortunately that didn't work out. So on behalf of the commission, I'd like to thank you. We do have two presenters tonight. First up, we'll have Mark Willmarth, but we're going to start with a few words from Dan Clark from the Local Government Center at MSU Extension. Some of you may have seen his presentation before, so I won't spend a bunch of time, stealing their thunder, but I just wanted to say thanks on behalf of the city of Helena. We will have a brief fill out sheet at the end of this. If you need assistance filling that out, then by all means, raise your hand and we'll be happy to help. If you haven't had a chance to get snacks, sandwiches, there is coffee, not that you're going to need it, but in case, please feel free to help yourself at any time. And if you have any questions or need anything, just raise your hand. We'll come over and help. This is being recorded as well, and it will eventually be on our YouTube page for the city of Helena, so you can review any of the materials later. So thank you once again.
Ready for me?
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening. Wow, that's loud. So yeah, you're not going to need coffee. I'm Dan Clark. I'm the director of the Local Government Center and partnering today with Mark Willmarth to provide this training for you. Mark's been asked to provide some very specific content for you. So he's going to have a PowerPoint presentation that he'll spend the first part of the session doing that with you. And then after that, it'll be my turn to work with you. And my style is, over the years, I've decided that it's, since I don't have a specific thing like Mark has a specific thing, so I don't want to undercut Mark at all in that he's coming with a PowerPoint. I don't come with a PowerPoint because for me, that just assumes I know what you want to talk about. So I want to have you start thinking, what is it that you want to learn by the end of this session today? When we're done at 11:30 tonight, you've got all your questions answered. Now you're thinking you do want that coffee, don't you? But we want to make sure we've had you've sacrificed something on what is today? Tuesday? Thursday? You are sacrificing opportunity on a Thursday night. There's still probably more Netflix to watch or more YouTube videos to scroll through. Instead, you came here to participate in this training. We want to make sure it's meaningful and relevant for you. So I just want to ask, is there anything specific about your board service that you want to make sure we're covering before we're done tonight? We'll make a list of that on that flip chart, and that can serve to some degree as an agenda for what we're going to cover between Mark and I. And it'll help Mark as well as he's going through his presentation. If there's things that he can roll or fold into his comments, he can do that so we make sure we're meeting your needs. So with that, is there anything in particular you'd like to make sure is covered before we're done tonight? And you get an extra cookie if you first one. There we go. Yeah. Okay. All right, so keeping the meeting moving. Great, thank you. What else? Okay, so communication, and so we'll say email. And so when you're talking about appropriate communication, you're also thinking both what's legal and then what would be appropriate just between humans. Right. Yeah. No, well, what's legal? Okay, what's legal? All right, that's good. Because some of that other stuff about the human thing, I don't know if we can fix that. If you don't know it by now, we're not going to share it. Yeah, answer that question for you in 10 minutes. Yeah. Let's say advisory versus administrative. No? Oh, so you're thinking open meeting laws, that type of thing. Okay, I'm with you. All right. We'll put boards and we'll say process. When we get to that part, if we still aren't answering your question, ask more questions. But yeah, I think we can probably touch on that. Yeah. Sure. I've got 2 markers. Ooh. Okay. So that legislative changes, what else? Okay. 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 So quorum. I saw another hand flittering, or maybe it's just shoving chips in your mouth. I don't know. Anything else? Yeah. Hmm. I could spell and right. Yes. Okay. So we can talk about that interaction between the staff and the board. These are all good. I wasn't lying when I said 11:30. I'm lying. We'll be out of here by 10. All right. Is this good? And as you can see, this is going to be pretty informal, at least when I'm up here. And so it'll be very iterative. So as things come up, let's continue the conversation. We'll address these and whatever else is on your mind. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to Mark Willmarth. We've been working together off and on for years. Mark's out of Great Falls. I very much enjoy. And when I'm up here, everyone leans back. so anyway, let's give a warm welcome to Mark Willmarth. He's up here.
I don't think I've ever had an introduction like that from anybody, but Dan's probably right that I'm not quite as in your face as he is. We have different styles, but certainly believe in a lot of the same things. And much of what I'm going to talk about tonight is about the whole kind of meeting challenge. And I'm not talking meetings within local government. I'm talking about meetings in general. So I'm going to give you, I hope, some interesting and valuable information to think about as you look at how can we have productive, valuable meetings. My hope is that Dan will hit on some of these more technical things as they relate to doing meetings within this particular environment. I'll tell you, I work half-time at the city of Great Falls. I do training and development there. So I've been with the city for going on 25 years. Never thought I would be in local government. And I've been in it for 25 years. So it's a fascinating environment for me. I certainly have learned a lot, seen a lot, and I also recognized kind of how the whole operation of local government is, because it's a unique animal compared to a lot of other places. I came from higher education. If any of you are involved in higher ed, you know that's kind of a unique environment as well. And I think about people and how people do what they do. And meetings tend to be an environment where we play out a lot of our function or dysfunction as it relates to how we deal with people. And so you're all part of different boards, committees within the city structure, trying to do really good work. And sometimes we kind of get in our own way. And so I want to give you some thoughts and ideas, and we'll talk about this tonight, about the whole concept of meetings and how we do those more effectively, and what kind of things we need to be paying attention to. So as I thought about this, I came up with It's doing it again. Came up with the fact that technology never works when you want it to. Okay. So I thought, you know, this is really a conversation about the meeting before the meeting. How many of you have heard about the meeting after the meeting? The concept of that. So what is that? Like, what's the meeting after the meeting? And is that a positive thing? The meeting after the meeting. If you've heard about the concept, the meeting after the meeting is when people are afraid to say what needs to be said in the meeting. And so when the meeting's over, they go tell everybody else about what they should have said in the meeting. And I always say that's a very unproductive behavior. It's like, how do we find a way to say what needs to be said in the meeting with the people that are there? So for me, it starts with having the meeting before the meeting, like having conversations about how we are going to do what we do, as well as what are we there to do. And I want to kind of split those out and talk about why both of them are equally important in any meeting that you're in. So I think the conversation tonight, if you work in another environment, if you are, you know, on your church board, if you are involved in anything that's a meeting, my hope is that you get some takeaways for lots of other things and not just what you're experiencing working on right now. So I'm going to start out with something that I think is interesting with a purpose, and you can kind of think about what this might mean to you. But a number of years ago, I found this research about listening that I thought was kind of fascinating, and it was a number of years ago. I am not going to argue the statistics that they share here. So if you say, I think that's wrong, it's more figurative than literal. But I want to share with you kind of what we are about as humans. And I think this has impact when you think about being in different meetings that you're part of. So, locking me out again. Okay. So I call this the laws of forgetting. Now, I'm going to share this with you, and I may, at the end, before I leave, ask you if you remember any of this, because this is the problem. What we remember or don't remember, and we probably forget more than we do remember, because we're not paying attention. And as humans, this is just what we do. So I'm going to tell you, I know that some of you are going to check out from me for a while, and then you'll come back, and then you'll check out again, and you'll come back. Like, we drift in and out when we are sitting and listening to something. So this is what the article said. First, they said that we forget 50% of what we hear immediately because we're not listening. So half of what I already said, you weren't paying attention to. And I'm not going to test you on that, but you were probably half listening. When you start chewing whatever you're chewing, you can't hear what's being said. And so we're only picking up about half of what we hear in the present. So that's an interesting statistic if it's true. And it certainly is interesting for me when I think 100% of what I say is pretty important, but you're only listening to half of it. So that hurts my feelings a little bit, if that's the case. But it gets worse. So then they went on to say that we forget 75% of what we hear within 2 months because we don't practice. We don't do anything with it. So if you learn something and you don't go and do anything with it, within 2 months, you've lost 75% of that information. Now, that's pretty bad. Like, I drove here from Great Falls to be with you, and you're only going to remember 25%. You might not even remember me in 2 months. It's kind of what happens if we don't do anything with the information. So practicing things is what makes it stick. And I'm just going to encourage all of you, whatever you hear tonight that you're listening to, that you think that makes sense. That's something I can do something with. Follow up and do that, because otherwise it doesn't matter. And for some of you, you might say, you know, I'm here because I have to be here and I'm going to just be present, but not necessarily pay attention. I'm not going to call out anybody on that. But I think there are things that you can take away that will help you wherever. And that's my belief about just being humans in this world, trying to communicate and do things effectively with other people. And meetings are certainly a place where that happens. Okay, so 75% of it's gone in January. of this year, if this is true. But then it gets worse. Then they say that of the 25% that's left, only 60% of it's even going to be correct. So you're going to make the rest of it up. And you're going to say, yeah, this is what he told me. And you'll see me some point and you'll say this, yeah, I remember when you told us this. And I'm going, no, I didn't say that. And I've had that experience before. It's like, yeah, that's a good point, but I would have never said that. So we don't even remember accurately all of the information. So you get to this place, what does that leave us? What's the percentage that's left that's accurate? 15%. 15% of what you hear today, you're going to remember in 2 months, if this is true. So it doesn't really matter. I'm going home. I'll get home before it's too dark out there. My hope is that that's not the case, that you will kind of pull out at least 15% and work on it and say, this really has impact. It made a difference. I mean, that you do something with it. But my hope is if you're a competitive kind of person, you say, I can do better than 15% and I'm going to work at this. I don't know what it will be tonight that you will go, okay, that makes sense. That's something I can do with. But think about that. Like, what is your takeaway from tonight? Whether it's something that I say or Dan says, what are you going to take away from this experience that's going to help you be more effective, more specifically with dealing with meetings within the local government environment, but more broadly, this information is valuable no matter where you go. I watch and listen to very dysfunctional meetings. And I think, why is it that way? Why does that happen? It's not that it's designed to be dysfunctional. It's that how we do meetings sometimes are not functional. And within this environment, you have parameters that you have to work with. And I think that just creates some structure. But within that structure, how do you run your meetings in order to make sure that what you're doing is productive and you move through the information that you need to move through? So I want to give you some thoughts and ideas around that to think about as you look at moving forward. How do we make our meetings even better? And that's not assuming that they're not good already, but how do we do this? How do we just do them a little bit better? Because how many of you just love meetings? Like, if I can pack my whole day with meetings, I'm just going to be about as happy as anybody. Like, most of us just don't look at meetings that way. And I think it's because they aren't productive because we haven't done things to make them productive. And that's what I want to share with all of you. And this is not just the leader of the meeting. This is all of us. Okay, so I want to give you some quick words that I use a lot. So the first two are clarity and alignment. How do we get clear about what we're there to do, and why we're there to do it? And then how do we get everybody involved and aligned behind that? Seems pretty simple concept. But to have the conversation about what are we really here to do? Like, does everybody understand kind of what this is all about and what our role is and what we're here to do? And is everybody aligned behind that? Because if you have people thinking, well, this is what I think we're here to do, and someone says, this is what I think we're there to do, you're going to end up doing this. And by the way, this visual is conflict for me. So if you see me doing this, it means we got conflict. So we're butting heads on things. So we need clarity and alignment. The other things that we need. Can you advance them from there? Okay. So I'll just point at you and say next slide. So the other three words I will put out there is conscious, intentional, and accountability. Accountability is one of those big words, I think, in the world today that we toss around a lot. But what does accountability really mean? But I say conscious and intentional a lot. Like, we need to be very conscious of what we're there to do, why we're doing it, and then we have to move forward with the right intentions. Like, do I have the right intentions for what I'm doing? And then am I holding myself and other people accountable to agreed upon expectations or ground rules for how And I'm going to show you what some of this means as we move through this. So I love this quote here. It can mean a lot of things to people, the impact of that. But the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. I think I was pretty clear in that communication, and then you went and did that. How could you not have understood that? So we think that we are clearly communicating, but sometimes we miss each other. How do we do that better? How do we have more clarity around what we're trying to communicate? And how do we get people aligned behind that so that we move forward collectively in the right way? So I believe that sometimes we just think we communicated well and we really didn't. And how do we get that clarification from others? Do people understand what we mean? How do we walk away with a sense of action? Like, here's what we decided. Does everybody understand that? Does everybody agree with that? Who's going to do what? How do we move forward? We need to do that in our meetings, is have clarity at the end about what did we decide and who's going to do what? Because how many times have you come back to a meeting and you say, okay, did you take care of that? Or where are you at with that? And they go, I didn't know I was supposed to do that, because there wasn't that level of clarity. And so then you start over again and you have to kind of talk about that and kind of rework that to make it work. So here are some of my observations and assumptions about this. So the first one is you have a passion for the board or committee of which you are a member. I'm assuming that, right? You're on it because you have a passion for it, right? Anybody saying, yeah, I was told you have to sit on this, I don't really want to be there. You join these things because you want to be part of whatever you believe that committee, that board is working on, right? So you have passion. Passion is a wonderful thing. I love it. It also sometimes gets in the way. Like, if I am really passionate about something, sometimes I am very narrowly focused on how I see things. And that creates problems sometimes when you have people with different ideas. How do we manage the passion, particularly if the passion tends to be in different directions? And again, that's where you see some of this. My second observation is that you want to make Helena a better community. I'm from Great Falls. I want that for Great Falls, and I plug into my community in different ways. You've chosen to plug into your community in part this way because you want Helena to be better, whatever that means to you. So there is a drive there to do good work, right? The third thing is that local government is efficiently slow. I just made up this term the other day, by the way, and I thought that works for me because I've been in it for a while, and it is efficiently slow. It's slow for a reason. It is not like a business. You need public input. You are on these committees and boards because the elected body wants your ideas about what to do about this. And that all takes time. And we want more and more public input. So it is slow, but hopefully efficiently slow, that things do get done. But we want to make sure that people have opportunities to weigh in and provide input. Okay. The next thing I thought about is it's important in local government to get feedback from the community. Like, the community wants to weigh in on things. And that's always the challenge in local government, is how do you get people to show up? They'll show up when we're about ready to make the decision and say, hey, wait a minute, you can't do that. Nobody told me about this. I don't know what the answer is to that, but I think that's the ongoing challenge, is how do we get the right people in the room at the right time to hear the right things so that we can make the right decisions. And it's a constant challenge. And I would say most elected officials, I hope, are interested in hearing input. Wherever that is on the continuum, we want to know what this community wants, and we shape our decisions around that. Ideally, that's what's happening. Most of you, I'm sure, are in advisory capacities. So you don't have the ability to sit and say, you will do this. You have the ability to influence the elected officials to do the things that you think will make Helena better. But that's different. And I had a conversation years ago with a board that was really frustrated because they thought they had the ability to not only make decisions, but spend money to do what they wanted to do. And they didn't appreciate the fact that they really were advisory, and the elected body really wanted to hear their thoughts and ideas, but they didn't have the ability to make decisions to make that happen. And that frustrated them. And they were angry at the elected officials because we told you we wanted to do this and it didn't happen. Once they understood that clarity and alignment, what their role was, everything kind of shifted for them. They said, okay, that makes sense. I get that. I didn't realize that. And it wasn't quite that clean, by the way. It was a little bit more challenge around that. But they finally understood what their role was, and then they kind of fit into what that was. So we want the feedback. Local government, elected officials want the feedback, but you have to be clear about what your role is in that, what your decision-making authority is. And I want to kind of give you something that may not fit as cleanly with this environment, but certainly is something to think about as you are trying to make decisions within your roles. Another observation is that you have to follow certain rules and are held to a higher standard in public meetings. I know people get frustrated with the open meeting laws and who are we allowed to talk to and what are we allowed to do, and I don't want to do anything illegal. And it's hard. It's just that this environment is designed that way because it has to be that way. And so there are some things that you have to follow, whether you like them or not, to be in the roles that you're in. So understanding that and meeting that to the best of your ability can be a challenge. It's not like sitting in your organization and saying, we're going to have a meeting. You have to do it in certain ways, and understanding that sometimes gets very complicated and can be hard to do, but it's also important to make sure that you're doing that the right way. Next one, your time is valuable, right? Your time tonight is valuable. And you want to get value out of the work that you're doing. And when it's either not fun anymore or you don't think you're going anywhere with it, because it's volunteer. Anybody getting paid to sit on any of these? I didn't think so. So you're not getting paid to be there. So you're a volunteer. As a volunteer, you can make a decision to say, you know what, this isn't working for me anymore. And oftentimes it's not because of the work that is expected from that. It's how that functions. People walk away from things where they say, you know what, this isn't worth it, or I'm tired of this. We're not getting anywhere, and so I'm going to do something else. So as volunteers, you can do that. You don't have to stay there. So that's a different kind of connection to what you're there to do. And then I think this is the last one. Another unproductive meeting isn't what feeds you. Right? We don't say, I just love to go this because I love to watch dysfunction happen right in front of me. Like, that's not what we're looking for. We want to go and walk away saying that was productive. So what does that look like? So I want to take you through some thoughts around that. Oh, I have one more. Meetings are a necessary and productive part of the process. Meetings are important if they're done well. But I'll show you a book, and maybe some of you have seen this. Anybody heard Death by Meeting? So just think of the title. You don't even have to read the book. Death by Meeting. That's how it feels sometimes. Like, I'm dying here. Like, this is not what I want to be doing. And yet meetings are a critical part of getting things done everywhere. But the frustration is that we have meetings that aren't productive. And so what does productive really look like? So you can laugh at this if you find this funny. It's like, we're dying here. I need oxygen to kind of live through this meeting. We've all been in those meetings that are not productive. We've all sometimes led the meetings that aren't very productive. But what is it that's going on that makes them productive or not productive? So I'm going to ask all of you, and then I'll show you the right answers, or my answers maybe. So when you think about this conversation, what makes a meeting a waste of time? And Dan, do you mind writing down on that, since you're good on the flip chart? That way I can be here to hear. So what makes a meeting a waste of time? Okay, going over the same thing every meeting. What else? Yeah. When it could have been an email. We didn't really need a meeting. We could have exchanged information and handled it that way. Okay, what else? Lack of agenda. Okay. Same thing. Okay. Don't have an agenda. We don't know what we're there to do, what we're there to cover, and it's just all over the place. Yeah. Nothing gets done. Okay. We walk out saying we didn't accomplish anything. Okay. Get off on a tangent. Lack of focus. Okay. No discipline on time. So it runs over. Yeah. I was just in a meeting yesterday that went beyond what it was supposed to. And because I felt at that moment I was more important than anybody else, I had things to do. And when it hit that moment and the meeting was still going, I started getting angry and frustrated, and I checked out. Like I wasn't paying attention anymore because it went beyond what I thought the agreed upon time was. It happens a lot in meetings, and the leader thinks, oh, this is great. Let's just continue the conversation. And other people are saying, I got to be somewhere else. And that's really frustrating, and it's really unproductive when it goes past that time. What else? A couple others. One person dominates the meeting. Yep. Happens a lot. And when you can't get a word in edgewise, it's like, so why am I here? Like, what's the purpose of me being here if I can't even weigh in? And I'm going to talk about that one because I think that's an easy one to fix if you're willing to hold people accountable to certain behaviors. And I've got a very simple one, and I'm going to share it with you and tell you this should be your number one rule. So we'll talk about that in a moment. Anything else? Okay. So essentially doesn't really look for input from anybody else. Yeah. Okay. And there was one other one. Okay. Lack of discipline in enforcing the rules. And I have a comment about that I will share with all of you that may seem harsh, but it's not. Okay. So when I say it, I'm not calling anybody out. It's something that we all do. But that's a real one. When we say this is how we're going to do things and then it doesn't happen that way. It's like, so what do we do with that? Yep. Nobody gets heard because everybody's talking. And you're leading right into what is my favorite ground rule that I'll talk about here in a moment. So go ahead, and if you can bring them all up, I think, yeah, they're all there. Okay. So here kind of hits on what you've been talking about. Yeah. Yep. So starting and ending on time are really important things. And you think, so how hard is it to do that? And yet it happens all the time. And again, that's the clarity and alignment that you have to have if you want these things to work. And what I believe is that all of us know what good behavior is. All of us know what makes for a good meeting. We just don't always do those things. So when I say the meeting before the meeting, what I mean is have a meeting about the meeting before you have the meeting, and then do what you said you were going to do from that meeting where you talked about the meeting. That makes sense, doesn't it? Right? That's clear as mud. But it is about talking about it before it ever happens. Because things will happen. And if I say, I don't like what you just did, and the other person says, well, I think it was fine. And you say, well, I think it wasn't. And they say, well, I think you're wrong. All you're doing is this, because there isn't clarity around those expectations. And again, this is not that hard to understand. It's oftentimes hard to do. And that's what we need to kind of push over the edge is we've got to not just talk about it, we have to actually do it. So lack of focus, domination by a few speakers, you hit on practically every one of these. And these are all frustrations that people have about meetings. And I think, okay, well, how do you fix that? You know, how do you not do that? So I'm going to give you three different kind of, they're not necessarily either ors, but kind of this versus this. The first one is content versus process. I'm going to tell you that if you are part of a certain board or committee, you probably have a sense of what the content is of what you're there to do. Now, you can get more specific about agenda, and we'll talk about that. But the content of meetings is what you're there to actually talk about. And that's important. It's like, okay, well, this is what this meeting is for. you have that sense of clarity and alignment around that. But then the process part is how you go about accomplishing it, which is really a lot of that last slide and what you were sharing. That's the how part. It's how we behave in the meeting. So you can say, here's what we're here to do. And if you do this really well, like we covered the topics we were supposed to cover, but we did it in a way that was really just not very productive, that's not going to be a fun meeting. If we don't have any clue what we're there to do, but we do it in a really nice, comfortable way, that's not productive either. You got to do both. But most of the time, people focus more energy on the content than they do on the process. And the process is what makes your ability to go through the content effectively actually happen. And people walk away saying, that was a good meeting. You've got to bring the two together. And I'm going to tell you, you have to talk about it at every meeting, not just what we're there to do, but how we went about doing it. And be able to say, wow, we didn't handle that very well, or, you know, we could have done this better. And there'll be more clarity as I kind of show you some of this. But we have to then be able to say that wasn't very productive. This is what happened. How do we make sure next time we don't do that? If we have those agreed upon expectations and we're willing to talk about it and hold people accountable to it, it's really hard to get off center. Like we can play within these bumpers. It's when we do this over here and we consistently do this over here and nobody says anything. So my harsh statement is, if it's over here or over here and you're frustrated, you know whose fault it is? It's yours. Are you at the meeting? Yep. If you're part of the meeting, you are part of the responsibility of making the meeting work. And when people say, well, that's not up to me, that's the leader of the meeting, I say, everybody is part of that. If it's not working and you don't say anything, then it's your fault for not bringing it up. Because 9 times out of 10, if you said something, someone else would go, I agree. Because they're all thinking the same thing. But here's the beauty in what I try and encourage people to do is, if you've already talked about that and agreed that this is how we're going to do things, when that happens, it should be pretty easy for someone to say, hey, that goes against what we agreed to. How do we get it back on track? That shouldn't be that hard. It still is, but it shouldn't be. So content versus process. And then there's strategic versus tactical. And just think about this. So I oftentimes sit in meetings and I listen to conversations. And when people get really frustrated because we didn't get anywhere, we didn't make any decisions, is it that you didn't make decisions, or you were talking about a topic where you couldn't, in that period, make a decision? Because tactical things to me are things that we can fairly easily move through and make decisions on, and say, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that. Strategic conversations are much bigger, and they're things that can't be solved in one meeting, or it might require that we need more information. When we blend the two together, that's when people get frustrated, because they walk away and go, we didn't do anything. And someone says, well, I think it was a really good conversation discussion. It's probably because it was a strategic discussion that had no, easy endpoint, but someone thought we should have made a decision about that and moved on. So you've got to separate those out, even if it's more here saying, okay, just so you know, this is a big topic. We're probably not going to decide on this tonight, but we're going to open the conversation up about it and figure out how we're going to get to some decision. You have to be clear about that, because that frustration is very real when people go, we didn't do anything. And someone else might say we did, but we didn't make a decision, but we can't make a decision. So you've got to separate those topics out, strategic versus tactical. And then complicated versus complex. Now, I share this with a lot of groups because this is a really powerful concept for me in a very relatively simple way, that when we are dealing with things, we're dealing with things that are either complicated or they are complex. And we can deal with complicated and complex in the same kind of environment, but you handle them very differently. So complicated issues, and go to the next slide, it kind of describes it, are challenges that are technical in nature. They're step by step. If you get the right people in the room with the right competency, you can solve complicated things. Okay. And The example that I put up there is building a house. Is anybody a builder in here? Could anybody in this room build a house? You know how to do that? Okay, so this would be the wrong group to deal with that complicated problem, right? But are there people? Do you know people? So you say to them, you need to come and figure this out. Complicated things are solvable with the right people. Complex things are not. So complex things are things that require innovative responses. They're confounding head scratchers with no right answer, only the best attempts. And what I'm going to share with you is I bet on most of the committees that you're on, the boards that you're on, that's what you're dealing with in a broad sense. You're dealing with complex issues that have no one solution. I put down here, homelessness is not a solvable issue. Hunger is not a solvable issue. Does that mean that we can't figure out things to do? No, we can do complicated things. We build a homeless shelter, or we do this, but ultimately it won't solve homelessness or hunger. And parking, when you talk about local government or communities, is an unsolvable problem. And I was told by our city manager in Great Falls that you don't solve parking, you manage it. You'll never solve it where everybody goes, that's the greatest thing ever. And it's every community. And I'm going to just tell you, I spent time in Bozeman a year ago with a group of people talking about parking in Bozeman. Now, how many of you have been to Bozeman and dealt with parking there? Is it worse than here? Probably. Downtown. They talk about a complex, unsolvable problem that there are multiple ways to approach it, but none of them solved everything with it. It was a fascinating discussion, but it meant that people had to kind of let go. And can you go to the next slide? Because I just breaking this down, complicated, linear, predictable action steps. There are things that you will do on the boards that you're part of where there is a flow to it, and there is a way to kind of have steps and kind of do things. But a lot of what you're going to deal with are probably very complex, with no definite answer. And you are then advising the elected officials. This is in our educated, passionate conversation. This is what we came up with with some ideas in order to address that challenge. But likely you're not going to solve it. Go, okay, we don't need to meet anymore because we solved homelessness in Helena, Montana. Like, that's probably not going to happen. So I always think as a leader, you lead differently depending on whether you're dealing with a complicated or complex issue. So complicated issues, to lead those, you just need to make sure there's structure and you're kind of figuring these things out. It's more objective and rational and logical in what you do. It's way harder with complex issues. And a lot of what we're dealing with today in our communities are complex issues. And you may say, I have a solution. And here's the challenge, and I want you to think about this. We can't solve complex challenges with complicated solutions. We can't, and I came up with this recently too. I've been really creative lately, and I'm just fascinating myself sometimes, that we can't action plan or flow chart your way out of a complex challenge. And a lot of people come in and they say, I got the solution. I know what needs to happen. And that's what they push on. It's like, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. This is the right thing to do. And it's like, is that true? Because if it's complex, you have an idea. You have something that we need to explore, but it's not necessarily the only answer. And if you've ever heard the concept that there's more than one right answer, or there may be your answer and my answer, and there might actually be a third answer within there if we are willing to kind of talk about where we're at. That's what happens when we're in complexity, that there are lots of different ideas. How do we come together with the passion we have about the issue and figure out what are some of the things that we can do? Because if I hold on to just what I think needs to happen, I don't care what you have to say. You need to hear it my way. And if you see it my way, you'll be right too. And won't that be wonderful for you? There are people that are like that. They just push their idea and don't listen to anybody else. That's not productive and valuable when you're dealing with complex issues. And I would suggest most of you are having conversations on the boards that you're on that are complex, not complicated. So think about that when you're thinking about either how you lead or participate in discussions about complex issues. Okay. So I think that that is something all of us need to be thinking about. And it's the world that we live in. We live in a very, very complex world. And not that it hasn't always had complexity, but I think there's way more complexity in trying to solve problems than just getting the right competent people in the room. If it was that easy, it would be great. But typically it's not that way. Okay. So here are the elements of an effective meeting. Now, this is coming in part from me and also some thoughts around death by meeting. And I've kind of shaped some of these over time, but I want to explain to you why I think you need to think about these elements, how you weave them into your meetings. You need to decide that. But I think there should be a certain flow to how we meet. So the first one is you got to define the purpose. You have to know what we're there to do. And maybe that is defined for you by the city where they say, this is the purpose of the meeting. But you have to talk about that with everybody and say, what do we understand about the purpose? You have to get clear. That's the clarity and alignment about what you're there to do. So you need to understand the purpose. If you don't have one, you have to spend some time coming up with a purpose statement that everybody agrees to. Yep, I think that's what we're here to do. Because if people have a different thought about what they're there to do, the meetings are going to be really challenging. So start with that. What are we here to do? Like, what do you think we're here to do? What do you think we're here to do? Let's talk about that and all agree together that this is what this is all about. So that's the first step. The second one is to determine the guidelines and ground rules. And I'm going to share a few thoughts around that here in a moment. But to talk about how are we going to behave when we come here? Every meeting that you are in has a culture. Every meeting that you are in operates a certain way because of the people that are there. And if we define that ahead of time and agree on it, and then we're willing to hold people accountable to it, the meeting process-wise will go the way it needs to. But every meeting is going to be different in why you're there and how you go about doing that. You have to talk about that up front. And you have to define and describe that very clearly. And then you have to agree on that. And then you have to be willing to hold people accountable when that doesn't happen. And I share with people that you can't hold someone accountable to something that you can't see. So if you say, you're just not being very respectful now, and the person goes, I think I am being respectful. Well, I don't think you are. Again, you start doing this because we're not clear about what respect really looks like. So what does respect look like if we're going to say that's important within this particular environment? And I've got an example that I think hits on that very clearly. The third thing is then you have to create the agenda. What is the agenda? How are we going to, what's the flow to the meeting? And then you got to stick to it. The fact that some people mention you drift, we sometimes allow it to drift. When it gets off the agenda, somebody needs to say, I think we're kind of moving over here. Maybe that's something we need to table. It's a good point. But how about if we kind of put that over here and maybe that becomes our conversation at the next meeting? People will hijack meetings if you let them. And people will continue to behave in a certain way because it works. When it doesn't work anymore, they stop doing it. So we have to be clear about what we're there to do, how we do it, and what is the flow of the content that we have in the meeting. And again, agree upon that up front. The next thing is that we weave action into it. So I always encourage people to start out every meeting by talking about what we agreed to at the last meeting. Like, so-and-so said they were going to do this. Let's talk about what happened with that. And you end every meeting with action. What did we agree to today? And if that means writing it down on the flip chart to say, okay, I captured this. Everybody agree that this is what we agreed to, and so is going to do this. And so at the next meeting, we'll talk about that at the beginning. You have to weave action in there. Otherwise, I don't remember who said it, but you say the same things over and over again, right? Was that you? No, somewhere over here, I think I heard that. So we repeat the same thing because either I wasn't listening, or I heard something different, or maybe I wasn't at the meeting, but I didn't educate myself enough to find out what happened at the last meeting. And then I come in and I want you to say the same thing all over again. It's like you need to weave that action into people know what we did and what we're going to do. And it should have that thread throughout it. The next one is that we need to evaluate how the meeting went. This to me is an important one that we oftentimes don't do, which is we say at the end of the meeting, how do we think the meeting went? Like, here's our ground rules, our expectations. How do you think we did with this? And then can take literally 5 minutes or less to do that. How did people feel about how the meeting went? Someone says, well, we kind of got off task a little bit, or, I think certain people probably dominated more than they should have. You bring those things up and then you say, okay, so how do we make sure that doesn't happen next time? And you just keep the process part a part of the dialogue, because it keeps you focused on what did we agree to how we're going to do the meeting in addition to what we're there to do. So you've got to bring those two together. And then last, which may be a different kind of conversation, I call it cascading communication. Like, who needs to know the information that we talked about? Now, you guys probably have minutes that come out of this and they go wherever. And so that might be taken care of in a different way. But if you think outside of this environment, you need to have a quick conversation about who needs to know what. And within a short period of time, we need to make sure we get that information out there. So we have to think about, where does this go from here? And again, it can be a quick conversation, but you are always weaving into your meetings doing these things. We talk about the agenda. We talk about how we went through doing it and how that worked. We create action. We talk about how do we communicate those things. It doesn't have to take a long period of time, but it is a consistent part of every meeting. And I guarantee if you do those things, your meetings will be pretty productive, because it will tighten up what you're there to do, why you do it, and how you go about doing it. And I just keep coming back to, these are not hard to understand. They're oftentimes hard for us to do because we drift back or we forget what we talked about and we don't actually do it. We don't actually practice it. So learning it and going, yeah, that's a really good idea, and not doing it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't do anything. So rule number one. This is my rule number one. And I want to talk about this and then share some other thoughts. So I have a number one rule in every meeting, and I don't care what meeting you're in, but this is my number one rule. And some of you hit on this in a certain way, but my number one rule is one person speaks at a time. Now, you think about that concept, and I want you to go sit in on your next meeting and then just check mark every time that somebody talks over somebody else, and just watch how much that happens, because it happens all the time. So this idea of one person speaks at a time connects to generally two things for people. So you think of, what is the impact of one person speaking at a time? Like, what does that connect itself to? Like, if one person's speaking at a time, what's happening? We're listening. Is that important? That we listen to each other? Absolutely. What else? Respect. I am shocked, because I ask that question with every group I talk to and share this, how quickly we get to those two things immediately. It's about listening. It's about respect. Are those things important in a meeting? Absolutely. So there is one specific behavior that shows that I respect the other person and that I'm listening. And it is a behavior. And it's a behavior that we can change if we're willing to commit to holding ourselves and others accountable to that. So I shared this with a business in Great Falls who said that the people in there said, yeah, we have meetings and it's like chaos. Like, we walk out of there and we're not quite sure what happened, and we got to figure this out because they're not very productive meetings. And so I sat in on one of their meetings and they talked over each other the whole time. And there was primarily one person that did it a lot. And they were one of the owners. There were several owners, partners of the business. So people were afraid to call them out. Like, you need to just be quiet. Like they didn't want to say that. So I said to them, all right, so here's an interesting concept. What if you agreed to this? One person speaks at a time. And so I pointed, but I didn't mean that. So just wipe that out of your mind because that'll be the next thought. I said, what if you tried practicing that? And that transformed their meetings within half a meeting. It doesn't take very long. And I'll tell you, I have done that. And it's amazing how quickly those behaviors change because people are aware of it. They go, wow, I just talked over you. I'm really sorry. Or people start raising their hand, which I say, okay, you don't have to do that. But be more mindful of the fact that if you jump in and talk over somebody, you don't respect them. You're not listening to them. That's not okay. That's a very easy behavior to change, but you have to agree to it up front. And then you have to say, and this is the easy part. If you agree with me, just say, I think we just broke rule number 1, and it'll bring everything right down. And then you can reset and move forward. It's fascinating how simple that is and how powerful it is. So the first thing I want you to do is sit in a meeting and not say that, and just watch how much people talk over each other. And then try and implement this. And if you do it, watch how quickly the dynamics of the meeting change. It is such a simple behavior. And yet we have a hard time not doing it. And we usually do it when we get excited. And it's like, oh, I got to weigh in on this. And we'll start talking over somebody. Or we do it when we're frustrated. And that's when we turn to the person next to us and start whispering to them about what we think is wrong with what's going on. It's like both of those behaviors are not positive, even though getting excited seems positive. You're just talking over somebody because it's like, if I don't say this now, I'm going to forget it. Well, write it down and say it later. You don't have to get it out because you think you're going to forget it. Write it down and let the person finish before you weigh in and do it. Just those pauses almost causes people to listen more carefully because now I'm going to listen to you and then I'll jump in once you finish what you have to say. So the next statement, if you saw it, is an interesting comment, which I think is true for a lot of us. You can probably take that into your personal lives and know that that happens from time to time, right? So we do jump in a lot, and we jump in because we're excited and we have no concept of the fact that we just told someone else, I really don't care what you have to say. What I have to say is more important. That's the message we're giving people. That's an easy one to fix. So I'm going to say, if this all makes sense to you, or if you're only going to remember 15%, make this one of the 15%, because I think this is such a simple thing and it can transform our meetings just by doing that. It will change things. People will be more mindful of not talking over other people. Okay, next slide. So I am the president of the Montana School for the Deaf and Blind Foundation, and we were on campus yesterday and did a tour in Great Falls. And I'm walking around and I see this up on the wall. So you can see there, speak one at a time, and it's kind of multiple versions of that. You think about the impact of that in that particular environment, where you have to focus on one person at a time to be able to understand. So it's a concept that really is about respecting and listening to other people. And why would we not want to do that? Because if we don't, what I'm going to say is the intentions that you have are not good. Like, you're there just to say what you need to say. And I think the next slide. Oh, okay. Let me come to this. There's another point around that. So you can see one person speaks at a time. I think this is in one of your handouts. And these are just ideas. These are not things that you necessarily have to do, but these are some ground rules, expectations that groups that I've worked with have written down. And most of these, I hope, would be easy enough to know if it was happening or not. Because there's the challenge, is you have to be able to know that it's happening or it's not happening. Because if you call someone out on something, they have to say, you're right, I did do that. So they have to be clear enough that people would know it's happening or not. So you look at these, meetings will begin and end on time. That's a respect thing, right? Respecting people's time. And if we say respect is an important thing, why would we not do that? Don't dominate the conversation. That's also kind of a respect thing. It's about allowing people to kind of share their thoughts and ideas. Because why would we not want to tap into all of this? Everybody is sitting here because they're part of this conversation. Why would we not want to hear from everybody? And I am pretty good when I am facilitating a meeting, backing someone down and drawing people in. So if you are leading the meeting, you should look around and say, you know, we haven't heard from you for a while. What do you think about this? Because 9 times out of 10, they are thinking about it, but they haven't been able to get a word in edgewise because someone else has been dominating the conversation. And for that person, you need to say, you know what, I think we get where you're coming from. How about if we listen to other people? So sometimes the leader has to manage some of that. But anybody in the room should say, you know, I think you shared quite a bit. We haven't heard from other people. Can we allow other people to kind of weigh in? And you manage the dynamics of that because you agreed on it beforehand, that you said, we're not going to do that. So if you start dominating, I'm going to say, all right, we need to let other people speak. So that becomes all of our responsibility to manage those dynamics. Focusing on problem solving, not finger pointing, personal attacks, you know, wanting to kind of draw people out and say, you know, you're the problem here. We need to agree that we're here to solve problems, not point fingers at other people. And I say this, it may not be a guideline or ground rule that you have, but think about the impact of that if we live that. Putting cell phones on vibrate or turn them off. I talk a lot about the distractions of the world today and how crazy that is. And we need to be mindful of how that impacts our ability to listen as well. So that's a pretty specific one. But how many of you have been in meetings where you have people that are, you know, they're trying to do it like they're not doing it, but you can see them looking down like this. And when we do that, we have just checked out, even if it's only for a few moments. We've checked out of the meeting. People see it. Don't think that it's hidden. And I see it when I talk to people. Like, you can tell when people have done that. And so if you're in it, you should be focused on the meeting, be efficient, effective, do what you need to do, and as much as possible, try and leave the technology somewhere else. And if you can't, tell people, look, I have a really important call I may need to take, so I'm going to have to keep my phone on. And if it rings, I'll step out of the room. So just to say that up front, like, I may not be able to stay completely focused, but I want to be here. So I think that's okay to do that, but just announce that to other people. If you don't understand what someone has said, ask them to repeat it or rephrase it. If you've been given the opportunity to provide input, fully support the decision. These are just ideas to think about. With any meeting or group that you're with, you need to sit down together and say, what do we agree to as far as how we will behave when we come to these meetings? Like, what are the ground rules for how we do what we do? And just write those down, be clear about it, put them up on the wall, put them on your agenda, and talk about them all the time. And if you do that, people will have a harder time not behaving in a way that isn't consistent with that. Because it's not drifted over here. It's like it's in front of us all the time. We're talking about it all the time. We end our meeting by saying, how did we do with that? And we say, wow, we talked over each other the whole time. I agree. I saw that too. So what can we do next time to do that better? And we don't finger point in those situations. We say we can do better next time. And it matters. When we behave this way, our meetings are much more productive. Okay, so next slide. So this idea that how can we expect people to do what we didn't tell them we expect? It's easier to hold people accountable to agreed upon expectations rather than telling people you're not behaving well in the moment, because that's, again, where you get some of this. So if you talk about it, agree on it, it's way easier to hold people accountable. But here's the key. You have to be willing to hold them accountable. You have to be willing to say something, because if you don't and think someone else should do that, then don't expect things to change in a meeting. If I'm not willing to step in and say, I don't think that worked very well, then I'm really not holding myself accountable to what I agreed upon. So somebody has to say something. And I want to hit on this too. this idea about advocacy versus inquiry. There's a difference in what you're there to do. So if I'm there to advocate, then I'm there to push my point of view. And that sometimes is important. And I think about in organizations, if you have numerous departments that are part of the conversation, that I'm coming to fight for and defend my department. So I need to make sure that people know what I need from the organization. And so I'm going to advocate and fight for my department. For all of you, it might be, I'm going to come in and advocate and fight for my opinion about what we need to do or what people I talk to think we need to do. And you just drive that. Inquiry is something very different. And I'm just going to encourage you to think about this, that inquiry is when you ask questions to understand another point of view. You don't have to agree with it, but you have to say, tell me more about that. Like, that's not something I've thought about. Help me understand that. If we can create that kind of space when we're trying to figure out these complex challenges, we're going to come up with solutions that will draw in from everybody. But if we come in single-minded thinking, I'm here to advocate this, this is the only thing that I think will work, this is what I want, and I'm going to push this, it's not going to be effective. So how do we learn to inquire more than advocate? Because the conversation should be much broader as we're trying to figure out what our final collective decision needs to be. That's what you're there to do. You bring really passionate, smart people together to try and figure out what could we do here that would make Helena better or make this particular challenge better. Next slide. And then I just want to hit on this. This may be different in your environment, but I also tell people you need to be clear about how is this going to end? Like, how is the decision going to be made? And if you work in an organization, you understand that sometimes the decision has already been made. Like, you don't get to say, I don't like that decision, I don't want to do that. You are there to figure out how are we going to lead the decision. And I love that phrase. We're not there to make the decision, we're there to lead the decision. How do we figure out how to make this work? And that's a reality. But if I am clear about that, then I know that my role is to figure out how to make it work. Sometimes it's the leader that makes the decision and wants to inform everybody about what we need to do. Likely not in your environments with this. It's going to be probably number 4. But it might be leader with input, like, and it could come from somewhere else that the elected body says, this is what we want to do and we need input from you. That's the advisory piece of it. But having clarity around what is the expectation of the end result of this conversation. It's important to say that up front, because people get really frustrated when they think, well, you asked my opinion and then you didn't do what I told you to do. And so you weren't listening to me. And I hear that a lot. Like, you weren't listening to me. It's like, well, I was listening to you, but that's not the direction ultimately I thought we should go, given all the information I had. So if I say up front, I'm looking for input, ultimately I need to make the decision, but I want to know where you're at with this, but I will take all of that and make a decision. If I know that, I'm going to be able to accept whatever the decision is a lot better. And I see this if you're ever involved in interviewing, where you're asked to sit on a panel and you say, this is the person we want, and then they choose somebody else. And you go, well, why did I do this? Because they didn't choose the person that we picked. It may not be because you were the decision makers. It could be that I wanted your input and that was valuable, but we decided to go this way. So when we have clarity about that, it makes it a lot easier. So consensus or voting, majority rules, and I don't know if you have options around that, but you need to, again, talk up front about how ultimately are we going to decide the direction that we're going to go. And if it's majority rules, you have that. If it's consensus, that's a whole different thing. Because having consensus means that everybody has to do a thumbs up. And everybody has to support it when we leave. And that's another really unproductive behavior, is when you have the conversation, the decision's made, you didn't like it, but it went that way, and then you leave and you tell everybody else, yeah, they made that decision, and I didn't really like that. That undermines that process in significant ways. So if you can't support it, you have to say something. And if you undermine the group process, that affects the effectiveness of the group itself. So again, you have to make decisions up front about how we're going to move through getting to some conclusion with whatever we're working on. Next slide. I think this just talks about consensus. So getting consensus is a hard thing sometimes. If it's a real divisive issue, sometimes that's not the best way to approach it, because you end up either watering down or coming more to the middle. It might not actually be the best solution, but again, you have to decide, is that the best way for us to make a decision on whatever the issue is? So what happens if a meeting is not productive? What should we do? So I broadly asked that of all of you. So what if we create all this and it doesn't work? What should we do? Quit? Talk about it, right? So come back to it. Say, we got kind of off in a different direction. Can we kind of talk about the meeting? So it is coming back to a discussion about the meeting and how it functions, that we have to take that responsibility. Because if you do this work and then you don't follow through and do it, it doesn't work. So I always remind people, as hard as it is, if you work it, it works. If you don't, it doesn't. So I have to say, I'm responsible. This meeting didn't go very well. I'm responsible for saying something. So I mentioned earlier that I was at a meeting that went over time. I didn't say anything. I just walked out mad. So I don't always practice what I preach, but I thought about it. And today I sat down with my supervisor and I said, I just want to say something. This was really frustrating for me because I had other things to do and I thought the meeting ended at this time. Wasn't clear when the meeting was ending, and it went way beyond that. And that really made me frustrated. And she said, well, what do we do next time? I said, we need to say the meeting's going to end at this time. And we need to stick to that, because I had other places to be. I didn't want to interrupt and be rude and say, I got to go. Although I felt like I needed to say, I can't handle this anymore. I got to go, which wasn't appropriate. So all this stuff was going on in my head. I was not paying attention to what anybody was saying. And so it took me a while, but I finally owned up to it and said, can we do this different next time? It's like, sure. Yeah, I didn't realize that was happening. I didn't know that we actually had an actual ending time, but we need to talk about what that is. So getting that clarity and alignment about what the meeting was all about could have been solved if we had had that conversation up front. But it irritated me, and I was angry at everybody. I was angry when someone else would start talking, like, quit talking. That's what I wanted to say, like, stop talking. We don't want to hear from you anymore. I got to go. I mean, I didn't say that out loud, by the way, but those were the voices in my head that created not a very good experience for me. Could have been easily addressed if we had talked about that up front and understood. So when there is clarity and alignment and we hold each other accountable, our meetings are productive. Upfront, agreed upon expectations are easier to hold people accountable to. So have the meeting before the meeting and talk about how you want to do the meetings and then stick to that. And if it doesn't work, then have the conversation again saying, well, that we talked about that, but that doesn't work as well. How about if we do this? Make sure that you are thinking as much about the content and the agenda as you are how the meeting is actually happening. So if you're in the room, you're responsible for how the meeting goes. And I have another, I think I'm going to put my name after this one because I think this is a keeper, that if you don't speak in, you can't speak out. That might land for you and you're going to go, wow, that's like heavy stuff. My point here is if you're not willing to say it in the room, don't leave the room and complain about it. Like if it's not working here, say it here, because it's not okay to go out and tell everybody else how horrible the meeting is. Because you know what that says is that you're a horrible member because you're part of that meeting. They go, why would you be part of something that's that bad? We need to be willing to speak in the meeting about what's not working so that we don't go outside and undermine what this group is trying to accomplish, because that's very destructive behavior in a meeting. So you're a member of it. So it is your responsibility to make sure the meeting is functioning the way it needs to function to be productive. And having that dialogue and agreeing on that up front can make all the difference in the world. So I'm not sure. I think I'm pretty close here. Okay, so I just want to open it up for questions, comments before we shift gears here. But what thoughts, ideas, comments do you have about what I shared with you? I think you agree with some of this. Because I see you over there nodding your head like, oh yeah, I've been there before. I've seen that. Yeah. Questions or comments? Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Yep. Mm-hmm. Don't what? Well, that's where if everybody else in the meeting has agreed to things and one person is hijacking it, well, these people, everybody needs to speak up. And you are absolutely right that this is hard, but I think it's harder to sit in meetings that are unproductive. It's like, okay, suffer over time rather than just ripping the Band-Aid off and saying that's not okay. Like stop doing that. And I wish I could just do that with people. It's like just stop doing that. Like don't do that anymore. And it ends. And I want to tell people if you keep doing that, something bad's going to happen to you. Because they're going to go, well, what do you mean by that? I don't know, but I think it's going to be really bad. So you might want to stop doing that. Like, wouldn't it be great if it worked that easily? But it doesn't, because we're talking about people who have different ideas about how things should be done. But if we are in a group agreement about how things are, like one person speaks at a time, that shouldn't be that hard to manage. Maybe the first time it's uncomfortable, but it gets easier the more that you do it and practice it. And if you say, no, I don't want to be the one to do it, then you have to accept the fact that the meetings aren't going to be very productive. And you are part of the reason that it isn't. And I say that very clearly because we all get caught in that sometimes. It's like, I don't want to be the one to say that. Well, then who does? Who is supposed to do it? Somebody has to do it. And if we've agreed upon it, it shouldn't be that hard to bring it up because other people should say, she's right. You're right. You didn't do that. And we should support each other around that because what's the end goal? Is to not walk out of the meeting and say, that just about killed me. Like, I hated that meeting. I don't want to come back to this anymore because the whole point of being there is to have impact and make a positive difference in Helena. And if you're saying, I don't know how that's even possible with this group, then you're going to lose good people because they don't want to deal with how the meeting's running, not with what the purpose of the meeting is. And we are there to manage that. So if it's not working for me, I need to say something, or I need to say, I'm out. And sometimes that is the decision. It's like, I can't do this. And that's really unfortunate. You lose good people because you didn't manage how they went about having the meeting. And that's really sad because I will tell you, working in local government, it's sometimes hard to find people willing to invest time into volunteer committees and boards to do the work that needs to be done by people in the community. It's hard to find people. And sometimes if they know, I've heard about that board before, I don't want to be part of that, then you lose that opportunity to really have impact. And to me, that's not okay. So we need to manage it so people go, I want to be part of that one because you guys do really good work. And you work well together. Even if you disagree, you still work well together. That's possible to get to that place if you choose to do that. But you got to make the choice. And it is a choice. And sometimes I got to step in and do what's right, even though it might be hard, so that I don't suffer for the rest of my time on that particular board. Other thoughts, ideas, or questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. I caught 80% of that.
Sorry. But yeah, I guess my question is, so like ending a meeting with an action plan and would those be added as agenda items themselves?
I think yes, I think they can be.
Okay.
Yeah. And think about this. Okay, we're planning a meeting. So here's some things that we're going to talk about. That's that rolling action. Here are the things that we need to work on. And there's agreement and clarity around, yes, those are the things that we need to talk about next time. So that can help you actually build your agenda for the next meeting as well. Okay. Other things? All right. So I'm going to just let you think about what are you going to remember about any of this in 2 months? And what will you take away and actually practice? Again, if there anything in this was valuable and you don't do anything with it, then what's the point? I drove to Helena just to see all of you, but it didn't have any impact. It's like, how can I use this to be more effective on the boards and the committees that I'm part of? That's the whole idea. You do good work when people work well together. And I'll go back to the passion part of it. If you're passionate about the topic, you have to figure out how to have those conversations in a way that helps you add value in the community, which is why we need input from all of you. But when you get frustrated with the meetings that you're part of, it doesn't help us solve the problems the complex problems that I think we are all dealing with in our communities. And we all care about making it better. So we've got to make better meetings so that we can make better decisions moving forward. So that's what I have. Do you want them to take a quick break before you start? Okay. And then he'll fill in some of the technical stuff that I don't get involved in.
I would
Yeah.
just like to say too, for the folks that some of you have already been looking at it, at your seats, we took the liberty of giving you a simple cheat sheet for
Yep.
parliamentary rules. And then following some of the process that Mark's talked about tonight, we took a stab at creating a meeting agenda worksheet. This isn't set in stone. It's not mandated. It's just an idea we came up with at the commission office as a method for you to implement some of these ideas that you've heard about tonight. So thank you.
Great. So take 10 minutes.
Yeah, we'll be back at 8:30. No. Yeah, about 10 minutes.
Okay,
Yeah,
great. Thank you.
5-10 minutes. We'll rally you up here at about 10 after. Well, that doesn't help.
Yeah.
Oh, he put my name there?
Looks like.
Oh, Danae or Dan? That doesn't sound like it. Could be here.
Well, it's weird because it could be. Well, this is wireless, so this. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
There we go. Probably there. That might be good.
Oh, pop back.
Because I'm so loud
Oh,
that
this.
it's like, wow, that's a All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you could find your seats, we'll get started here in just a moment. Yeah, we're going to lower the cage. The Thunderdome.
I slide out before you're done.
Oh, you're fine.
Just 'cause
Are you going home tonight? Yeah, no, you do what you need to do. I'm okay. Yeah, hear me yelling, and
So don't call me out.
if you're not here, we'll call you out. Yeah.
Do you want me to try?
All right, well, let's get rolling so we can get you home before it's too late. I think we're committed to be 8:30. Who's gonna be watching the time for me? Because I will keep talking until you're all out of the room. All right, so you start giving me like a 5-minute notice and we'll try to talk fast. Okay, and so we're done at 8:30, so 8:25. Give me the high sign. All right. Yeah, make it public appropriate, the high sign. Yeah. Dude. All right, any bets on how many times I'm going to trip over that plug? 7 times. All right, we'll see if we can get that done. All right, welcome back from break. Wasn't Mark great and wonderful? I think he's a wonderful asset. So now I think a lot of what Mark was saying, he had a slide dealing with this as well, as the tactical and the strategic. And I think what Mark was covering was a lot of that strategic stuff, right? How do we really approach the work we do? What I'm going to focus on is what is the technical things we need to do? How do we make sure that we're in our lane, that we're following the laws, making sure we have appropriate procedures in place so that we can focus our energy on doing the work and deliberating on the issues that attracts us to our board service. The last thing you want to do is spend all of your energy fighting over power or influence or whatever, fighting over this little inside baseball stuff. And the rest of the community is like, we don't care about that. Can you just focus on your purpose and your responsibility? And so oftentimes we travel around the state working with local governments, cities, counties, boards, special districts that are struggling, and they're focusing more on the internal stuff. And a lot of that is because they don't have a good set of bylaws and rules that provide that guidance. So as you create that structure, then the decisions are made. You've already debated and made a decision on how we're going to conduct our business. We have our rules of procedure, we have our bylaws, we have our ground rules. Now it's about execution. And I could come and participate and just execute on those things. We've already defined the sideboards. We know where the rumble strips are. So now let's just focus on doing the good work of our board. So that's what I'm hoping you're going to get out of some of this today. And so what I'll talk about is some of that technical stuff in addition to the great work that Mark did with you already. So let me start with this question and have you ponder on it, because a lot of what I want to say is going to be built around this philosophical foundation. And once you understand your philosophical foundation, why you're here, then it's easier to apply whatever circumstance presents itself to you. You can say, okay, how do we put this issue through this filter and make a determination of how we should behave? I hope that made sense. It did in my head, but that doesn't mean anything. So I'm going to ask you the question. I want you to think about, why do we create government? We've been doing it for thousands of years all across the world. In every society, we create some form of government. Why? And this is like an improv class. Yes, and. So there's lots of reasons why. Who wants to go? Why do we create government? We want order. We want order and structure in our community. And what does order look like? Okay, so the opposite of chaos, right? So we want the opposite of chaos. We want a set of rules that's provide guidance for us, right? Urban chickens in, urban chickens out, right? We're going to have that debate and we're going to decide where are we going to stand as a community around urban chickens, right? So we have rules. We know urban chickens in this town, are they in? Look at you. So highly elevated now. So you've got urban chickens, they're in. Some communities, they're out, right? And it's been a very contentious process to make that determination. What else? Provide basic services like water, sewer, transportation, public safety, public health. Public safety, right? So we want to have, particularly when we come in and we congregate, we're a herd animal. Humans are a herd animal. We like to have the safety and protection, and we live close together, right? And so within that, human instinct of getting close together, we also have a tendency to bump into each other. And so we need to create this structure and rules and safety to protect ourselves from each other. And what are the rules of the road, right? You all got here safely because we have already defined, we have a set of rules when we drive down the road, right? And it's really important that we follow those rules. Otherwise, bad things happen. And we're gonna have people that enforce those rules. I lived in England for a while back for a couple of years, and I never saw a police officer when I was driving on the road. So you know what? I drove as fast as my little car would drive because no one was telling me otherwise. It was really hard to come back here where we monitor that stuff. They have since fixed that. But yeah, driving on the motorway at 93 miles an hour. Woo! Great when you're a 19-year-old kid. Woo! All right, so we like those order, that we like that structure. We like to do with government, to do the things collectively that we can't do individually. So think about that. It makes sense for us not to have in our backyard a hand pump for water and a pit toilet next to it. And we have a burn barrel that's burning our garbage. Could you imagine what Helena Valley would look like if you came out every morning and our only way to deal with garbage and refuse was a burn pit or a burn pile in your backyard, a burn barrel? You'd wake up with that oily, oozy smoke, right? And I think 100 years ago, we realized, you know what, that's not working for us anymore, right? We've got to pool our resources together as a community and deal with our solid waste and our sanitation and our water and our streets. We have streets that we're not riding on dirt roads. We have paved roads that are by and large straight or intentionally going somewhere. That's all planned. We've thought about it. We've come together as a community. We've discussed these issues and we make a determination. How do we make that determination? Do we all show up at the high school gym or at the Civic Center and say, okay, we're going to collectively talk about and decide as a community how we're going to govern ourselves? No, we don't do that, do we? It's really inefficient, right? So what have we decided to do instead? We have representatives. We elect people to represent our interests and make decisions on our behalf. We have abdicated some of our sovereignty to our elected officials, some of that. But there is this responsibility that government has to make sure that what they do is open and transparent and allow you to participate in that process. They are facilitating the public's process. Whether you're elected official or appointed by an elected official to facilitate some aspect of the public good. And part of that responsibility as a board member facilitating the public good is to make sure that you're conducting your meetings in an open and transparent way. We're going to meet. This is what we're going to talk about. If you're interested in that, we welcome you to come. And we're going to give you time on the agenda to share your thoughts and influence on us as we look at all the perspectives represented in our community and try to make the best decision for the most people and make that recommendation up to whomever within the system that's going to take that and add it to additional input and insights before the city makes a decision. So when Mark was saying the process is, what did you say, efficiently slow or? Yeah, it is glacier speed. If you're finding ways to do things more effective and more efficiently in your board, you're likely breaking the law. Just telling you. If it seems, oh, we're getting things done, it's like, let's really look at what we're doing because we're likely not following the rules. It's designed intentionally to be deliberative, to be thoughtful. It's intended and designed and created that way. It is not designed like a business. You don't walk into a town pump or Walmart or Target or Winco and on the door it says, come and comment on our budget. They don't care what you think. Their relationship with you is transactional. The relationship the public has with you as a government is way different because you're providing essential services they can't get anywhere else. There's not some other, if I don't like the city's transportation system, I can't go to their competitor and say, well, screw you, City of Helena. I'm going to go with XYZ's transportation system. That's not a thing. Our transportation is a reflection, our transportation system, water system, sewer system, planning, all that is a reflection of our community. Having a conversation about how do we want to look? How do we want to govern ourselves? How do we make decisions collectively as a community about things that are important to us? We've created a structure in order for people to engage in that process. And so it's going to take a while. It's going to take a while for that process to play itself out. And we're making decisions, hopefully that are deliberative and thoughtful, that they're going to have more resilience the outcome of the decisions we make are going to last a lot longer than if we're just making rapid fire decisions. Right? There's a reason why it's designed to be slow and cumbersome. But no need to make it more cumbersome than it needs to be, right? So when we talk about effectiveness of our meetings, how do we design our meetings and our agendas, right? So we can do what we can to influence our effectiveness and our efficiency within the structure that we're operating in. And that's really what I think the focus of Mark was, is how do we make sure we're doing it well and not making it unduly complicated and cumbersome or unappealing for anybody to want to participate or engage. So with that's kind of a framework, right? Think about, you are appointed as a board member to facilitate some aspect of a very complicated system, to provide input to the city about how they should proceed. And that input comes from and is derived from, how do we facilitate a conversation in our community? Think about the complexity that you're facing in a city. What is it that the city has to focus on? It's far ranging. Parks and recreation, transportation, wastewater, stormwater, what else? Law enforcement, fire protection. If a city was to be bought by let's get this wrong, a hedge fund, what would be the first thing they would do? Would they keep it in as an intact organization, or would they break it off in all of its subsequent parts? Because it makes more sense to run it as a separate entities than run it as one big business. So it doesn't make sense. What we've designed doesn't make necessarily sense on the business world, but we're not in the world of business, right? So think about that. We've got all these disparate pieces and parts put together. We've asked 5 people to make decisions on behalf of the whole community, all, 40,000 people of Helena. Is it 40,000? 42? Close, getting there. So trying to make 5 people make a decision on all the complexity that the city faces. And so they say, look, that's pretty complicated. We can't do a good job with just what we know as 5 people. So we're going to create a whole structure, an infrastructure, a human infrastructure of boards that are going to focus on specific things. And they're going to be engaging the public on that specific area. And they're going to deliberate, and they're going to discuss, and they're going to hear and weigh, and all the ideas, options, and opportunities. And they're going to have some thoughtful, deliberative input that's going to feed up through the system to the commission. So it's already been vetted to some degree. But when it gets there, guess what they're going to do? They're going to go through the process all over again, right? But now we have something really specific to comment on, because it's already been matured and chewed on and regurgitated. It's finally this final product, but they'll again have another hearing, or they'll have another public comment on that before they decide to make some sort of final action on it, or postpone it, or we need more information. So it's designed to be set up that way. So you are part of that whole human infrastructure that's been set up, along with the pipes and the roads and the asphalt and the parks and all that stuff. It's this layer of people out there. And so I don't know what's your total number of boards. You have a census of how many board people you've appointed? 600, I bet. 31 boards, and so 31 times 5, roughly. That's who's good with math? I'm not. This is why I do what I do. Bunches of people. So there's this whole layer, bunches of people out there doing this work. So I think I was working with Bozeman. Boy, my howdy, those folks, they love Missoula. Oh my. You go to Missoula and they got a committee for everything. You know, I usually do this there, and I have people introduce what committee you're serving on. Oh my, it's like, I didn't even know that was a thing. They just make up stuff and say, let's put a bunch of people and talk about that. So yeah, they have probably 1,000 people that serve on boards in Missoula, the city of Missoula. I think Bozeman has like over 600, or did. I think they've been working on trying to whittle that down. So it takes a lot of people to run a village, is what I'm saying. And so then there's a duty that you have as a member of this infrastructure. You are representing government, and you're doing for the public what they can't do for themselves. And there's this agreement that we have that we're going to be making these decisions and mediating these conversations, but you're going to be part of that conversation. It's part of the responsibility and duty that you have as being government. So I did look up, so here, handouts, let's do that. You can tell this is why I don't have slides, because I just make stuff up as I go. Here we go. All right. Let's talk about, let's turn to your packet that's labeled left packet. And it's got a bunch of pages to it. Left-hand packet. It says board packet, table of contents. And I want you to turn to page L for left, because there's a right one also we may or may not get to. And I'll just tell you this, we're not going to get through all the pages in here. And I've deliberately created a whole bunch of content that will be a resource for you and your board moving forward. So don't throw these away, because there's a lot of content in here. There's the Montana Code of Ethics that we could or could not talk about, but I want to make sure I have all the resources. So if you want to talk about something, I've got the resource there to talk about it. But if we don't, keep it and read about it later. So at the top of page L1, this is where the foundation of everything we do stems from our founding document. And what do we call our founding document? It's our Constitution. And I don't know about you, but I am super proud of Montana's Constitution. It is a rock star document. Yeah, and so I think it's great. And it's got a wonderful story. It's inspiring, and it's used in law schools when they talk about state constitutions. It's an example that they use for a very small p progressive constitution that's very thoughtful, encompassing. They talk a lot about our sunshine laws, and it's an interesting story. Why do we have such aggressive sunshine laws in the state of Montana? Our history. Where was the seat of power in the state of Montana prior to 1972? Yeah, it could be argued that the power center was in Butte, and a lot of decisions that government ratified were not necessarily made in a very open and transparent way. Government, prior to 1972 in our new Constitution, government was pretty opaque, right? It was very difficult. They used to have hearings with the legislature, and people would come in and say their piece, and they say, okay, thanks for everybody. Now you can all leave. They'll close the door, and they would make the decision behind closed doors. Like, how do I hold you accountable as an elected official if I can't see what you are doing? Thus, in our Constitution, Article 2, we have our Declaration of Rights. And in that Declaration of Rights, number 7, section 6, 7, or 8, 9, and 10, it talks about the right to participate, the right to know, and the right to privacy. So if you look there, the right to participate, the public has a right to expect governmental agencies to afford reasonable opportunity for citizen participation in the operation of the agency prior to final decision as provided by law. So that, as provided by law, ding, 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 legislature, you need to create laws that ensures that the government adheres to this expectation. And it also provides for the public, what am I to expect from my government? So having these clear expectations is very helpful, right? Because then we can spend our time working within that framework and not having misaligned expectations about how government should behave. So we have a law, there's the law, and we're going to follow the law. And if we don't, then you need to hold us accountable for that, as Mark's been saying. Section 9, the right to know. No person shall be deprived of the right to examine documents or to observe the deliberations of all public bodies, except in which the demand of individual privacy clearly exceeds the merits of public disclosure. So we had that question up here about, where was it? I can't remember what I was going to say. Oh, emails. Whew, there we go. The emails question, right? Where would that come from? The email question, right? So that's one of the things, and we'll get a little deeper in that. But just think about that. Can the public right now observe the deliberations of a public body if they're conducting those deliberations via email or text? No. And if they have a right to observe those deliberations in real time, I want to see, in Montana, we have a right to see the sausage being made, right? They talk about legislation is like watching sausage being made. It's really ugly, but hopefully the outcome is pretty tasty. So that's what the public has a right to observe that sausage process. And so if you're cutting them out by having those email conversations, that's a problem, right? We're not adhering to both the principle of governing in Montana, but also the letter of the law. And then so here's the other thing too, this right to know, right? The public has a right to know and observe deliberations and examine documents, but there's also this other thing, this right to privacy. The public has a right to privacy. Individuals in the state of Montana have a right to privacy, which is unique because not even the federal government extends that in our Constitution. It wasn't until the 1880s when the US Supreme Court said it's implied in our Constitution. that we have a right to privacy in the United States. But in Montana, we have an explicit right to privacy. So here we have these two competing constitutional values. We have one, the right for the public to know, but there's also this right for individual privacy. And sometimes those two issues are going to come in conflict. And then you've got to decide whose constitutional right are we going to violate? The public's right to know or an individual's right to privacy. So if we want, and we have time, we could delve into that. But my guess is your boards will it'd be very rare if you're ever faced with those two constitutional dilemmas, right? So, and if you are, then you should be talking to somebody on the staff saying, something's going wrong here. All right. So that's the right of individual privacy is essential to the well-being of a free society and shall not be infringed without the showing of a compelling state interest. So there's got to be a compelling reason why we're going to infringe someone's right to privacy. And it's not absolute. And we can tell you stories. I don't think we have time to tell you all the stories. Got lots of stories. No, they're really good too. Okay, we've got an hour. You good? All right. So we're starting there. That's our Constitution. So we're starting at the very top. So we have a 1972 Constitution. When that is done and ratified, all the lawsuit Constitution, all the lawsuits are settled. Who gets the Constitution next and what do they do with it? Yeah, people ratify it in by vote. They vote and say, yes, we want it, but we can't govern ourselves with a 72-page or 78-page document. It's just not detailed enough. So the legislature gets it. And what do they create? The law, which we call right now the Montana Code Annotated. So that law is used to describe or operationalize what the Constitution explains. So we have 78 pages here in the Constitution, but then the legislature creates the MCA. And has anyone seen the entire set of the Montana Code Annotated and how it sits on a shelf? It kind of sags the shelf and it fits about this big. It's tens of thousands of pages of law trying to interpret these 72 pages. Yes. Yeah, and it's different color every year. And I'm desperate to see the new MCA because it's not out yet. And that's so the question, what are the new laws? I don't know. I do, but I don't. So these handouts do not reflect the 2023 legislative session because I have yet to see the MCA. So I can cut and paste and change all my handouts to update it with the new statutes. And I don't want to go through, I don't have that kind of time to go through every single bill and take that language out. I'm sorry, I ain't doing that. So they're late. The law kicked in on October 1. We're accountable for it. We just don't know what it is. Glacier speed. So we're just patient. It'll all happen. Hopefully before the next session, but it'll happen. Is anyone here in the Legislative Bureau? Hopefully I'm not offending you. You're working hard at it. Yeah. Appreciate all the work you do. All right. So the legislature meets, they create the laws, they operationalize it, try to define and give us the sideboards about what those concepts, right? So we have a single sentence for each of these constitutional declarations of rights, a single sentence. But then if you look here on page L1, 2, and 3, and 4, the legislature meets and they say, okay, we need to operationalize it. We end up with 4 pages of law that defines and gives us parameters about how to apply that. When are we in bounds? When are we out of bounds? All right, now your responsibility on the local level is to take what the MCA says and then how do we in our board operationalize that? So you're directed to create rules of procedure. And in your situation, the council has adopted somewhere your boilerplate rules of procedure, so right there. So you have a set of rules of procedure that defines how you're going to, on the local level, operationalize in your board. So if you follow those rules of procedure, you're also going to be then complying with this and the Constitution. So now we have local. So okay, you got the idea, right? So go with me. Bottom half of page L1, we have that highlighted section 23103. This is where I say the local policies. It says each agency, which all y'all would be considered an agency from a variety of different definitions, but we'll just assume that we're all agencies. Each agency shall develop procedures for permitting and encouraging the public to participate in agency decisions that are of significant interest to the public. So you need to develop procedures, right? And that's what Danae was holding up, is that's your set of procedures. So you're satisfying a criteria in the law, that you're directed by law to create procedures. So instead of every board having their own unique set of procedures, that's pretty inefficient. So the city has said, we're going to create a set of procedures that all boards are going to follow. So all boards will operate at some level of consistency, and it allows the public then to engage all these boards in a consistent manner, because we all know the rules of the game. All right, so we're going to create these local procedures. Now let's see what else it says. It says the procedures must ensure adequate notice. Now, is adequate notice an ambiguous term? Yeah. And when we look at the top with the constitutional stuff, it says that you need to afford reasonable opportunity. Is that ambiguous? Yeah. Well, reasonable opportunity, what is it, adequate notice, these are ambiguous terms, and you would think the Constitution, I'm okay using ambiguous terms in the Constitution, right? It's a big flowery document, it's okay. But the legislature should kind of dial that in and lock it down, and they punted on that one. So they use the term adequate notice. So that's left for us to interpret. So when you're trying to create your local procedures, you're trying to decide, well, what does adequate notice mean? For you, clearly, tweet it out, give you 4 hours, or I guess exit out, give you 4 hours, and you'll be there. But you, oh my, give you 2 weeks, a letter in the mail, and bring a van by and pick me up. Oops, right? So if I'm trying to write my local policy, who am I going to write it to? The guy that wants it tweeted out in 4 hours, the guy that wants 2 hours? I don't know. And I don't certainly want to violate anyone's constitutional right. I want to make sure you're adequately noticed and you have an opportunity to participate. I don't know where the line is, because they used ambiguous language. So who do we go to if we want to clarify ambiguous language? What's that? Oh, yeah. Probably very truer than you'd think, not the answer I was looking for. What's that? So we can go to the judicial branch. So I could say, I'm going to make it 4 hours, and you're going to say, yeah, I'm not playing that ball. And I'm going to sue the city because I don't think 4 hours is adequate notice. And so then we go through the court process, the court system, and we would get a determination. I'm sure the Supreme Court at the end of the day would say, yeah, 4 hours is not adequate. But the problem is the Supreme Court may not tell you what is adequate, just that that's not. So you're back in that guessing game. So that's one way we can do it. So we can go through the court system. What's the other option? Yep. We can go to the Montana Attorney General and you say, hey, we want to do what's right. We don't want to go through the hassle of a lawsuit. We don't want to compromise our trust with the community by playing this game, trying to guess. So could you bring clarity to the situation? Because the county might have one standard, the city might have another standard. You go to another town, they might have yet another standard, all of which could be legitimate. We don't know. And as you're trying to conduct business, having that erratic policy is not very effective. So the Attorney General is the one that gave us the answer that we're operating from, because clearly the legislature hasn't decided to clarify it any more than adequate notice. What's the standard that we operate by? 48 hours. Here's another thing I find ironic. The Attorney General also said in that opinion, 48 hours would be considered sufficient notice when contemplating a final action, but that amount of time should increase with the relative importance of the decision being made. So there's a little bit of ambiguity on top of your clarity. Here's the deal on that one, though. We have never found anyone being challenged on that part of the Attorney General's opinion, because you're likely not going to be making a very important decision that's the first time it ever shows up on the agenda. You're likely going to be contemplating that decision for a very long time before you pull the trigger on it. So it's one of those things. And so that's why people are saying, oh, we've been adequately noticed for months before you made the final call on that. Yes. Yep.
So the law now says, or has said for a while, adequate notice is 48 hours. The Helena City Commission, however, passed a set of, gave us bylaws that said, you guys, though, you have to provide 7 days notice.
Yep.
That seems a little backwards to me, given that they're decision makers, we are not. We just provide advice. So I'm here in part
to learn these basic concepts or hear the basic concepts of meeting the laws. But I think it's worth asking, why is the Helena City Commission holding us to a higher standard than they hold to themselves? Another example is the definition of a quorum. They have given advisory boards a very strict definition of quorum that they themselves do not adhere to either. So we're left to wonder, what are they doing and why? So that's
Yep.
my
Great
question.
questions. Let's deal with them too. Let's start with the open meeting or the noticing component of it. I don't know. There's probably some administrative reasons and rationale why they've chose 7 days. I'm not going to defend one way or the other. However, how do we what can we do in this democratic representative government that we operate in? What can we do if we're not happy with the policy that exists, right? Have the conversation, engage in the discussion, and find out, well, why is it that it's 7 days rather than 48 hours? And is that sufficient? Is it over? Is it too much? And yeah, there may be some good reasons why. There may not be some good reasons why. Maybe it can be negotiated to at a different time. But yeah, so that's a great question. So have the conversation. And then, yeah, asked and answered. So that's, yeah. I don't know, but I'm assuming that they have a rationale for it. So the other question was the quorum, the quorum standard. So I'm curious that the city commission doesn't define a quorum. 5-member commission, am I correct? So a quorum would be 3 members constitutes a quorum, correct? So it's a majority of the body. Is that different from you? I thought I just read the guidelines and it said it's a majority of the board. You have a quorum. Yep. Yeah.
And that is not the first time that's happened. So this is part of the confusion because I also speak out.
Yeah.
These are problems that Helena advises for that we're having with our commission.
But no, yeah, correct. And so, yeah, it needs to be addressed. Yeah. So what does address mean to you? And I'm not here to defend nor support either one of those things. And so that's one of the questions you've got to think about too, is what does address look like? So you have the meeting, you express your concerns, and they say, duly noted. We appreciate your concerns. We understand them, but yet we feel this is what's appropriate moving forward. And so then would you still then say, okay, I feel that we've addressed the issue? So what you're saying is the only way you're going to accept the issue being addressed if they change to conform with what your feelings are. Okay, so moving on then, because it sounds like this discussion's been going on. Well, I don't know. My guess is they've probably heard. They've heard and they've answered and they've responded. And you may not like the answer, but that's the answer. Yeah. Yep. Not here to defend nor support one way or the other, but yeah, so that's, and yeah, so if this is, if this is no longer a space you want to occupy, as Mark said earlier, you know, you've got to decide, is it worth the fight anymore? Right? Is it worth the fight? 40,000 people in the community. You have how many? 100 and some odd board members? So you're in a pretty important role, and there's a framework and guidelines that you operate within that role. Like it or not like it, you have an opportunity to influence and engage in conversations about it. And so there may be different standards, but different standards may not be bad standards. So you just got to decide, how do I fit in this? Does it fit for me anymore? Yeah. So not encouraging one way or the other, but those are some things you gotta suss out on your own and decide. Here's the rules of the game. And I think what's happening with the commission, in my experience in working with them over the last year or so, is that they're trying to tighten things up. As this particular commission is trying to figure out, how do we fully engage and use to the potential that the advisory human infrastructure that exists, how do we fully engage that in a meaningful way that's going to help us make better decisions for the community? And I think that's why you're seeing some of these changes that are happening as they try to tighten this up, try to figure out. And I'll say this is not chiseled in stone, right? This whole process that we call this, you know, this democracy or whatever experiment that we're engaged in, we're learning. There's no set of standards that are out there saying this is the right way. And I'll tell you this, from my experience in this system that we operate in, you're lucky if you can achieve 70% of excellence. How's that make you feel? Because of the process, right? Because the process is, we come together and we're going to debate, and we're not always going to get the best answer. We're going to get the answer that most of us are willing to live with. And that's not always going to be the best answer. So there's going to be this level of leakage in the system. And that's what we've accepted. We're okay with operating. We have, at least for the last 200 years, 240 years or whatever it is, with this system that doesn't meet the exact best answer. It gives us something that we can all live with. So that's another way to look at it. All right. That's what, 4 times? I've got 3 more to go. Okay. So we have this process. Clarity on the law is expressed down here. So we have 4 pages of information that gives us from the MCA that clarifies the role of local government relative to open meetings and citizen participation. You add just a handful of sentences describing each of the AG opinions and the Supreme Court case notes, and now you're looking at about 34 additional pages of clarification of those 4 pages here. So there's a lot of precedence that's been established over the years, and you can thank Billings for that and Butte for that, because they keep pushing the edge and people slap them back and say, hey, and so there's a lot of Supreme Court cases come out of those communities as they're trying to explore and find out where's the limits, where's the edges, as we're trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work. And sometimes the legislature or the courts or the AG kind of slaps them back and says, nope, the line is here, right? They were operating in a place of ambiguity before, and now we have clarity as a result of that. So we can thank those communities for that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With the new administration, there was a different approach to public meeting and open meeting law, and there's a lot of things, you know, that
Yeah,
maybe
different.
was practices and maybe they'd interpret things differently, but it definitely is a change where
Yeah.
major things go on behind closed doors.
Yeah. And that's where we're seeing more and more of that accountability. People are stepping up and saying, hey, we need some, there's been a way in which we've conducted business. We have a framework that we've been operating from. Some of it's very clear that we need to follow and stay in the within the sideboards or stay in our lane. And when we don't, then it's, yeah. And what happens when we operate outside the bounds or push the envelope? What happens when it comes to public's trust? It goes down. And when the public trust goes down, is it easier for you to conduct your business? No. So what I like to say is the higher the level of trust you have with the public, the lower the transaction cost of doing business. Right? There's a trust there that we trust what you're doing because you're transparent, you're open, you're engaging, and so we don't see anything. There's nothing happening behind the curtain. But if you start closing off and hiding and trying to duck and weave, that trust level goes down, and it's forcing the public then to watch you more, and it gums up the whole system. And it makes government work less effectively and less efficiently because you have all these pressures on you. Records requests go up, more people show up at your meetings, more consternation. You try to float a mill levy to support some aspect of governing, and what's the chance of that passing? Right? Pretty low if there's a low level of trust. There's a lot of other things involved in that. So, all right, so you had the question about, let's touch on the question you had on, let me do this. Here's open meetings. If you want to look up, these are specific to municipalities, these statutes here. And then there's an AG opinion here that talks about advisory boards are also following that umbrella of being open meetings and citizen participation. Let's look at, well, let me ask you this question. What constitutes a legal meeting? What makes a meeting legal? There are 6 things that have to happen in order for a meeting to be legal. What are those 6 things? So we need notice, agenda. I heard a quorum, is that right? Or did I just imagine that? What else? Public comment. Minutes. How many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. Because you probably may not get this last one. Turn to page L3. Top third. 23202. Meeting defined. Oh, that was 5. 5 if you're keeping track. Almost there. Meeting defined as used in this part. This comes back to your question about emails. As used in this part, meeting means the convening of a quorum. So we got that. Of the constituent members of a public agency, whether corporal or by means of electronic equipment. Corporal means what? In person. So whether we're in person or connected electronically. Now, way before we even had Zoom and all these email and all that stuff, we had phones. Back in the old days, we had phones. We had a great defining case law with the 2 county commissioners had a phone conversation about a land use decision. And they decided over the phone how they were going to vote on that land use issue. And then they came to the meeting and so here's my question. How did that ever get out without one of you saying, oh, Bob and I were on the phone last night. We decided this is what we're going to do. likely what's happened. And so they said that you can't, if you have a quorum meeting, discussing, hearing, discussing, or acting on something within your jurisdiction, you're having a meeting. And so the public doesn't have an ability to observe that and participate in that. Now, if it works that way, if the public can't observe it, if you flip it over and say, if we have a meeting where the public can participate and observe, would that make it okay? So can you do a Zoom meeting? Obviously, since you probably can do that. Zoom meetings work because our law says it can. When we had the pandemic and we went into lockdown, in the state of Montana, we didn't have to shut down government. Some states had to give special exemptions to allow their government to continue working because they didn't have a provision allowing them to conduct business electronically, but we do. And so it was an easy connect the dots and say, yeah, we have the ability to continue the function and operations of government, and we could do that over electronically over Zoom. And that's what we did for whatever time, and then we are somewhat out of it. So the last thing we want to hit on that is, okay, so we're connected either in person or electronically to hear, discuss, or act. Now, why am I making a big deal about the word or in that statement? If it said and, all three of those things would have to happen in order for it to be considered a meeting. But the legislature chose specifically not to use and, they used or, which means any one of those three would constitute a meeting. So if you have the two important things here, I'm going to get a different color to just emphasize it, is if you have a quorum that is hearing, discussing, or acting, you're having a meeting. And if that's happening, then all of these other things need to be in place to make it legal. So if you're having that email conversation, substantive conversation, now I don't have a problem, it's ministerial or administrative. If I email out to the group, if I'm the chair and say, hey, we're meeting next Thursday, and someone emails back to the whole group's reply, oh, hey, is that at 6 or at 7? And you send back, it's at 7, well, that's not a problem, that's administrative. But if then you send back another email and say, hey, I see on agenda item number 3 that we're going to discuss this, and I was talking to Larry down on Main Street, and this is what he said, and this is what I think we got to do. Now what happened? Now we're having a meeting, right? So we've got to be careful about how we communicate. Some of it can be administrative and ministerial, and some of it can be substantive. And when it gets in the substantive conversation about something that you have jurisdiction over or advisory power over, and you have that electronically where the public hasn't been noticed, has public comment, all the good stuff, then you're in violation of the law. You go ahead.
Are you able to share with your public body background information? I mean, it gets at that issue of here and not discuss it or act.
What's informing the process?
Informing, and that's part of the here. What's the limit there?
So yeah, so what I would suggest is if you come across, I come across an article that's, wow, this is a pretty good article. I would probably send it to the staff person saying, hey, I found this article I think would be really relevant for our advisory board. Then they could probably, when they work with the chair to create the agenda, they can send it out as part of the packet and say, here's something. So that packet then becomes what, yeah. So that's on the website, I'm assuming. It's emailed out to whoever wants to receive emails. And so there's a way in which that could be. So then everybody's getting it at the same time. Yeah, that's what I would recommend. And I don't know if that's written out in specifics in your bylaws, but that's what just how to operationalize that. But good question. Anything else on that? So those are those 6 things you want to make sure happen. So anytime those things are taking place, you've got to be very careful, right? So, and you've got to develop language too. Say you're sitting at a ball game, there's 3 of you there, you're not talking about business, which is fine. Someone comes up and says, hey, I want to talk to you guys about XYZ. You say, not it, I'm going to go get popcorn. Right, you got to figure out, or say, hey, look, we're here to watch the game, not to talk about that stuff. If you want to talk about it, please come to the meeting. Question.
Thank you. I sent out a meeting announcement to the full board, and it was the basic one. Hey, here's our agenda. Here's our meeting minutes draft that we'll be talking about. Here's some, meeting materials. And then I was accused by a city staffer that I was in violation of Montana's open meeting laws because I didn't BCC everyone. And I said, I don't believe that's correct. I believe I can put the information out because it also goes up on the website as well. And then what becomes a violation then is if there's an email discussion. And I know at least the board I sat on, we said it all the time in our meetings verbally as well as in the emails. Hey, here's some information we want to share, or I want to share with the group. Remember, don't reply all. If you want to talk to somebody individually or send an email individually, you can do that, but do not reply all to this meeting. So I know that it's to be safe. You could BCC everybody, but I was not in violation of Montana's open meeting laws. And I would like your take on that.
So my take on it is, and it's not, again, if it's feeling like, oh, this is an efficient way of communicating, what did I say earlier? You're likely violating the law. So my take on that is, if you know what you're sharing back and forth as a board is informing the evolution. You're making sausage. You're informing the group that the public doesn't know what it is that's informing you. And so if they go meeting to meeting and there's a whole lot of stuff going on in between, you've evolved as a board that the public hasn't had an opportunity to, because again, you're there facilitating the public's process. You're there for the public, not for your own edification. You're there for the public. That's what makes it less efficient if you want to think about, hey, how do we move this boat along? So my thought is that you would reserve that communication to the meeting packets. Here's some articles, let's review these so everybody can review those. It's the same thing if I was on the planning board and I had all this planning information I was privy to and the board was privy to, but the public was not. Public shows up and now we're like 10 steps ahead of the public. It's like, wait a minute, how do we catch up to this? And I think it's the same principle. So you want to make sure that the public is coming along with you. So you want to reserve that to those meeting announcements where it's being shared with the whole public. Right. Yeah, I can't speak to the BCC part of it. Yeah. 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 So part of what, let's see, what do I want to use here? Yeah. So part of what, and I'm just hearing your side of it, and I'm not sure of all the policies and everything that governs the process. So I'll plead a little ignorant because I don't know. But what we have is you have your bylaws, which are very clear. Here's your bylaws, which are a reflection of what the state law says, which is a reflection of what the Constitution says. So that's governing there. And then we have what we call norms, right? We have certain norms and procedures that may not be written down. And this is right or wrong, they exist. And so I don't know if that's what's one of those things that you're tickling on, one of those norms that's like, hey, that's not how we roll as a board or not. I don't know. But those are one of those things when that happens, well, maybe we need to clarify that, just so we don't have this misunderstanding. We're not spending, here's the thing, you want to spend your energy doing the work of the board rather than spending your energy around process. And that's why I like to say policy governs, people don't govern. Right? People don't govern, policy governs, right? So if you have those policies in place, then you can govern around that structure that you've created, the rules of engagement. Anyway, but I guess I can't say right or wrong on that specifics, but yeah. Local government center, yeah. I'm not, well, I don't know. It may not be a violation of the open meeting law, but it might be a violation of the local policies. I don't know. So I don't want to get too deep into trying to parse out, because I always get stung on this because I hear one side of the story and there's always another side. you know, and I'm sure you're telling your truth, and I'm sure there's other truths out there. And that's, yeah.
Well, when a good policy.
Well, we're in Helena. Salty language. Yeah. Because you're close to Butte. It rubs off.
I go to Butte occasionally,
That's right.
but I guess my point is there's nothing that gets, there's no advantage to not being transparent if you're a
Disadvantage.
public board.
Yeah, and it's hard work. It's hard work. It's intentional, and you'll often trip up, and it's mea culpas, and we're sorry. We'll do it better. You know, if we have to back up and redo that decision again, we'll do that. That's the thing I always find fascinating is a local government body screws up, they violate the open meeting law. It's very clear. They get called out by the public, and they double down. They double down. They go to court because we can't be wrong, and they get slapped back. And then they have to start the process all over. Now, at the end of all that, you spent a whole bunch of treasure, whole bunch of time, you've split the community, and you have to make the decision over again. And where's the trust gone? You've just flittered it away. And so a lot of that mea culpas go a long way in trying to bring and restore. Yep, we lost our head trying to be a little quick, get this done. But we messed up. And we'll start the process over again, start the conversation. We had the story, we had a airport board that got a big FAA grant. I always want to say FFA grant. Say, well, what did they have? Anyway, an FAA grant it was going to redesign their whole county airport. And they thought, oh, hot dang, we've got a timeline, we got to get this going. So they jumped on their computers, and for 6 months in their basements, this airport board went through and created this whole big master plan, how they're going to spend this FAA money. And then they started putting notices around the county saying, hey, we're going to have our big reveal. The county attorney saw that and said, oh, no, you're not, because we didn't see one notice, one opportunity for the public. Yeah, and they couldn't convince that board as their legal counsel that they had done it wrong and they need to start over. They called us in. And so between the legal team and our group, we spent 2.5 hours prevailing upon that poor board before they acquiesced and said, yeah, I guess you're right. So they had to start the process all over again. Now, here's the thing. Had they had meetings, had they noticed it and allowed the public to participate, what are the chances that anyone would even show up? Right? But they had to start the process over again. And probably the chances are people showing up because, oh, I lost trust in you. Now I'm watching everything you're doing. And the cost of doing business just went up. So getting better. What else do we have? So I think what you could do is just say, hey, we're going to revise the urban chicken ordinance. And then everyone shows up and they say, oh, we decided to table that. Let's just talk about the budget now. How many people showed up at your budget meeting, your budget hearing? Oh, yeah. But this is not uncommon. That is probably, I would argue, the most important. Well, actually, it's all the meetings leading up to it that are important. But that hearing, this is where the city is deciding how they're going to take your dollars, your investment, and how they prioritize that and how they're going to invest that around the community. And no one shows up. My hope is that they're showing up at all the meetings leading up to it. And they're showing up at your meetings, informing staff of how, that's a big process. You probably start in February or never end. Yeah. So hopefully there's more participation. And by the time the hearing happens, we're all good because we feel it reflects our values, our interests, and our concerns and our investments, and that because we've had an opportunity to participate in the whole leading up to it. And so now there's nothing else to say because we've locked it in. Let's hope that's happening. Yeah. But it's not uncommon for those public hearings that no one shows up. And it could be because they don't care. It could be that they've already participated leading up to it. Go ahead. Alone? Yeah, good question. Yeah. So then this is where the law comes in. The law says, okay, this is what we're going to consider to be adequate notice. It's going to be the time and ways in which you notice the public. And so there are still requirements that you have to physically notice and put up a piece of paper in a bulletin board saying, we're going to have a meeting. This is what we're going to hear, discuss, and act on. That's our agenda. And they're just now allowing, I think with the legislative session, whoever asked the question about what's the changes, is we're allowing, and we're starting to say, now, how do we also use technology as another venue to because we've been doing it for a long time. We've been using it as a supplement. But now what are the expectations around social media and websites as another official meeting notice area? Usually they say notice the meetings and then, in your 2.3, the first one we looked at, 2.3, 2 or 103, where we said each agency shall develop procedures for permitting and encouraging the public to participate in the agency's decisions. Permitting and encouraging. There's a statutory expectation for you as a governing body to encourage public participation. So people often, well, what does that look like? What does encouraging look like? And we say, well, the law says you need to post it in these locations, but add it to your website, post it on social media, skywrite, whatever else you want to do to encourage participation beyond just, if you're not driving by the courthouse and happen to walk in and see the meeting notice, you wouldn't know. So what else are we doing? So there is one statutory expectation for encourage. The next sentence says the procedures must ensure adequate notice and assist public participation. You got to encourage and assist them in participating, right? Instead of trying to say, look, we're going to create these frustrating processes and procedures, we really want, and we want to encourage that engagement and participation, because that's what's informing us to make these decisions. Again, if you approach this, that it's not me, I'm not the one that's on the board because I'm really passionate about this, and you may be. How do I check my passion and my advocacy at the door and say, look, I'm really concerned and interested in what the public has to say. I'm here for them. How do I engage them, get them engaged and participating and sharing, so I can see that range of issues and concerns that they have, and we try to then take that and mash it down into some coherent policy that accounts for that range of ideas. That's why it says in your bylaws that this is not a place for advocacy. You may find you're passionate, so passionate about your issue that you might be better served to take your passion outside of the board and be an advocate to the board than being on the board, because really your role on the board as an advocate is really problematic. But you're really there to facilitate the public process. And having that knowledge about the issue is helpful. But being an advocate can be discouraging and unhelpful. So trying to figure out what that balance is between advocacy and facilitating public process. I'll go on to say the agenda, and I'm sure your agenda format is going to account for this, but the agenda for the meeting must include an item allowing public comment on any public matter not on the agenda, but within your jurisdiction. So oftentimes you have an agenda saying this is what we're going to talk about. And if that's the only way and only avenue the public can engage the board and government is through a posted agenda saying this is what we're going to talk about, you can comment on that and nothing else, we've only gone halfway. That's why we've added this other part where you get an opportunity to comment on anything that's not on our agenda. You can help inform us and set future agendas by coming and saying, hey, have you considered this? Well, no, we haven't. The 5 of us hadn't thought of that. Thank you for bringing that up. Does someone want to add that to a future meeting agenda? I so move. Great, let's put on the meeting agenda. Right, so that's an opportunity for us in that facilitation. We're going to drive the agenda. We're going to drive what we're going to make decisions on, and we want you to participate and respond to that. But we also want to be open. What else is there that we're not seeing, we're not hearing, that we need to be informed about to include in a future meeting agenda to facilitate the community's conversation around that? So lots of stuff gets put on that agenda that comes from the public. It should be that two-way street, not just driven by your agenda is the only thing that the way that they can inform you. That's 6. Got one more and then we're done. See, I've got 15 minutes. All right. Is that making sense? What else did we want to cover? Did we get all the things on our list? No, not that one. Over here. We talked about communication to email, keep meetings moving along. Did Mark's gone now. Did you get enough of that from Mark about kind of that responsibility of keeping moving meetings. Do you want to talk any more about that? Was that sufficient to, that you have that responsibility, you have a duty, keep it going? The other thing is, who's chairs in the room? Who are the board chairs? So some of that's going to fall on you as well. I like to encourage you to have a metronome in your head. What's the pace? What's the flow of the meeting? Not this fast, of course. But how do we keep this meeting going? Right? So we have, okay, meeting agenda item number 1, to do X, Y, Z. Is there a presentation on that? Staff member, can you please give the presentation? Boom, they say it. Great. Is there any questions of the staff member for clarification, understanding? Okay, go ahead. Question. Any other questions? No questions. Now let's proceed. Any comment for the public? Comment? Any public from the comment from the public? All right. Is there a motion on the floor? Right. So just think about, what's that flow? How am I going to flow? What's the flow of that meeting? It doesn't have to be really pushing it, but don't stand around and wait. If you got something to say, we need you to step up and say it. We're not going to sit around and look at our navel while we try to ponder something. If you're a ponderer, I am a ponderer. I need time to think and process. 7 days is going to be plenty of time for me to read the content, the materials, the packet, to think about it, to process it, to come with ideas. So when I come to that meeting knowing that, what's your name? Ben, I know that Ben's going to run this thing like a metronome. He's not going to stand around and tolerate a lot of me thinking around. So I got to come prepared to make my comment, weigh in and share my thoughts and engage in that discussion around the issues. Because if I'm not prepared to step up and take that space, Ben's moving on. Right? So pretty soon your board gets accustomed to a rhythm and a flow. You got to figure out what's that rhythm and flow. And then your meetings can be a little more efficient. But it's not intended to run over people either. So you got to strike. That's why we've elected you to be that board chair, because we want you to use that discretion that we're giving you to be really thoughtful about running this meeting, right? And how we're going to make sure we get the best of this group as we facilitate this conversation to make good decisions on behalf of the citizens. But we're not going to sit here for 3 hours fussing around with it, right, Ben? Okay. Not too much YouTube to watch. All right. Yes, sir. Fantastic question. So limiting the amount of public comment is the question. I didn't see that in your, is that something in your board policies? Limiting the amount of time for public comment. So can they adopt a policy like that independent of that board or that packet, or is it the answer is no limit? Okay, so great question. Right now, the legislature has not said one way or the other. AG has not been asked that question one way or the other. No one's pressed it in the courts. So it's one of those things out there, it's a delicate space that we're occupying, that we are limiting the amount of time the public can comment. Around some jurisdictions do, some don't. But the rule of thumb is, as you talk to city and county attorneys, no one wants to be the jurisdiction that pushes the envelope and gets the lawsuit or the question asked, for fear that if it goes to the court, they'll likely say, no, you can't. And then it's open mic night, Thursday night, down at the courthouse or the city hall or whatever, right? We don't want that. So we want to be very careful about how we handle that public comment and allowing sufficient time. So city and county attorneys have kind of debated this back and forth, but they've kind of settled on 3 minutes would be the minimum. 4 minutes is better, 5 minutes is great, right? And so if you think about a very complicated, if anyone's here on a planning board, you've got a very complicated, subdivision going in. And you just allowed the developer an hour to give a presentation about the subdivision. And now I'm going to give you, a citizen who lives right next to it, that's going to be impacted by it, 3 minutes to say, what do you have to say about it? That doesn't go over very well, right? So you got to be thoughtful about how we're going to use that. So it could be, as your group, if you're getting a lot of public participation, and let's face it, we're getting in a time right now where public participation can also be a weapon, right? So we've got to balance that. But if you're finding it really struggling, where people are taking over your meetings, and because there are people, maybe not in Helena because you guys are cool here, but there's places around the state where people are showing up at meetings and they're just taking 2 hours in public comment with a 3 minute time limit. And it's really disruptive. And so they're trying to figure out, how do we manage this? And so if you're finding it challenging in your particular board and you would like to add a time limit, then that's something that you can petition Danae, and they can put it on the thing, and you go through the process and they can say yeah or no or whatever. But it seems like there's a way to do that. It's currently not in your process, in your bylaws, but there's a philosophically that I'd like you just to think about that. We want to have that level of engagement. We don't want to shut it down, but when it becomes unproductive, how do we find that sweet spot where we maintain productive public conversation and discourse without limiting it too much and not going overboard? Mhm. No. Other than just philosophically. Right, philosophically. So that's one of the things I think the planning board and the commission, they need to consider that. It's like, are we allowing sufficient time for the public to engage in this? Because we're making a change to our landscape. When was the last time in Montana, the last 20 years or 50 years, that we've gone out and plowed up a subdivision and planted wheat? There's some places in eastern Montana that used to be a subdivision that are gone now, but it's been a while since that's happened. And so we're dealing with property rights. So there's constitutional, there's due process. So it's a thing. That's why land use decisions have long timelines that we've got to follow, and lots of public opportunity for public to be noticed and engage and participate if they choose, right? So there is that expectation. So just trying to balance that. And what I would say, if you do have a policy, make sure you apply the policy consistently across the board. Don't give you 5 minutes and you 3 minutes because I like you and I don't like you. Or if we're going to say, hey, look, our rule says 5 minutes, but we got a room full of people, 50 people here, 5 minutes, we're gonna be here for a while. So I'll entertain a motion so put it in your bylaws, that we can move that down to 3 minutes, but no less. If a majority of the board says, yeah, we want to make it 3 minutes, we'll make it to 3 minutes, go. Or it's at 3 minutes and there's one person showed up. I move that we want to extend it to 7 minutes and give this person an opportunity to say what they want to say, but with a limit. So if you do it, make sure you write out that policy, that you have that flexibility to shift if need be, but it's going to be done at the beginning. So everyone's consistently treated the same. And there's not, because then you're seen as being arbitrary about your application of the policy. And we've seen enough law and order to know what arbitrary and capricious means. So, yes, sir. Yeah, good question. I don't know if there's rules in your policy that addresses that, or did you want to weigh in? Because I can. Okay. So the public has a right to comment. And this is becoming a touchier thing right now around the state. As people are getting more engaged, they're coming with expectations that are different than what the reality of how government works. So they're getting frustrated and upset. So they have a right to comment. So oftentimes what I encourage board chairs, Ben, using language saying, hey, look, this is an opportunity for the public to comment and to inform us as a governing body ideas and thoughts that either reinforce or help us see things differently. But it's a comment period. If you choose to use your time asking us 50 questions, that's up to you, but we're not going to respond. We're not going to engage in a debate. So there's a system that we've designed, and this is not designed as a public debate, but it's an opportunity for them to comment, to inform us, to help us see things we hadn't seen before. So if you can guide them and try to define for the public your expectations as a board, what you want from them, it's easier for them to step into that space because it's been clear, I've been explained what I want. And if I choose not to adhere to those expectations, that's fine. I don't have to engage with you. There might be something, and you can say, look, if you got questions, talk with us offline. Connect with a staff member, but this is not the forum for responding for a Q&A or call and respond. You can, there's nothing in the law that says you can't, but oftentimes it kind of spirals out of control. Yes, sir.
Or shouldn't be engaging the other direction with public comment. I think that's
yeah, that thing too. But yeah, so yeah, I like that. So flipping that around as well. Yeah. Yep. or challenging on it, or that's not true or accurate. And that's the thing. And this is what's frustrating right now. Particularly right now, here's the deal. Right now, school boards and library boards are getting hammered. That day will sometime change, and you may become the board of choice to get hammered on, right? And so those entities are struggling with this, with these conversations. And so, yeah, so likewise, just say and set that expectation, Ben, and the rest of you chairs that say, look, we're here to listen to what you have to say and refrain from, and have that maybe be a rule too, that we're not going to engage on our end either. Hand up over here. Thank you. It's just, all right. So we got 5 minutes. I think we got through most, we talked about legislative changes, minutes, quorum, board staff, relationships. Oh, well, it's even 5. Okay, minutes in your packet, L3 and page L4 talks about meeting minutes. It's also in your rules of procedure. What are you calling them? Board? What's the name of it? So you have the bylaws and policies, I think also address meeting minutes, but this is statutorily what is expected for all public boards in creating minutes. Sufficient. Yeah. Yeah. It was. How do you set that? What's the expectation for the staff? They're to help but not do. Secretary.
You've seen potentially on the city website, the commission has essentially action minutes where there's a summary. They're a little bit further along than action minutes, but the official record would then be adopted as the recording. We have set up that infrastructure now with the boards. In fact, we just had a staff training recently to walk staff through how that might look. For those of you that fell under the bylaws for the general advisory boards, what the commission asked was that you elect a secretary to assist in that process. And that's essentially what we try to do, is template as much as possible to make it as easy for a secretary to just timestamp that electronic meeting record. So it's a good question. I guess it's not an official answer yet, not until it goes through official adoption by the commission.
And I'm excited for the city of Helena that they're going down this path. Because we'll often encourage, don't bother with the electronic side of it, because it takes a lot to meet that standard. And it's not just, we're going to record with my phone the meeting and then we're going to post it on our website. That's not the expectation. And so there's a lot that goes into it. So I'm happy to see that you're willing to take on and lean into that part of it to make it more accessible for the public to engage in your meetings and access your meeting minutes. But you're correct. You not only have that electronic record, but you also have to have those, what they call action minutes, that goes along with it. So you still have to have a written minutes along with your recorded audio recorded. I think the new law that deals with recording, I don't think it goes to boards. It's just the governing bodies, the commission, county commissions and city councils.
Correct. So 890 does just apply to the governing body, which is the commission.
Yeah.
However, the commission has expressed interest in that electronic meeting policy, and it plays into the favor, in my opinion, to the boards that we do this electronic policy for all of you, because then the official record would be very much like the commission, that recording. The city is paying for that infrastructure for you to record your meetings and then make those action minutes that a little easier, and to Dan's point, a little bit more accessible, transparent.
Yeah, that's that give and take, right? It takes a lot of energy to make things transparent, and then it's just taken away from doing anyway. So it's a double-edged sword when we try to be transparent. It takes a lot of resources and effort. Okay, I think that's about as far as we got. We missed out on the board staff relationships, and I think that's an ongoing thing as you're trying to sort that out. And I guess I don't have a lot to say on that, because that's kind of an internal thing, and that's not the altitude that I fly at. Is that a good way to put it? Because I'll step all over and make a mess of it, and then I'll just drive away home and say, yeah, sorry. I just want to leave with the last 1 minute is just say, I want to thank you for your board service. I want to thank you for your willingness to volunteer, to engage and participate and sacrifice time and effort in your life to make your community work better. The whole system works because you folks are willing to step up and do it. And so public service is a valuable thing, and I'm glad to see that all of you are willing to sacrifice to provide service to your community. So thank you. My hat's off to you. And I wish you well as you continue moving forward. And you can find our contact information at the bottom of those packets. And we'll try to respond in a timely manner. But there's a whole lot of people out there that keep emailing us. And we try our best to get back to everybody. So with that, it is now 8:30. Let Ashley know that I finished on time.
So Alex handed out that little, I guess it's sort of a quiz, but it really was just a way for us to confirm that you were here. That was a request by several board members. So don't fret about getting it right, quote unquote, but there is an opportunity also for you all to write some comments on the back. I can't stress enough how much we appreciate you guys taking the time tonight. We really think this is important. And so it makes you more effective, and it makes the city of Helena more effective. So thank you once again for coming. You can leave the worksheets either at your seats or drop them off the table on your way out the door. Thank you.